Hello everyone and welcome to Foil Friday. How's it going? Hope you're all doing incredibly well. Hope you had a great week and I hope your workday is almost done. But if it's not, I'm here for you for at least the next 3 hours. So how's it going? I am donned in my esoteric symbolism for the day. So that's good. Today we're doing something a little different, like I said in the title and the announcements. Normally for Tinfoil Tuesday or Foil Friday, we'd be looking directly at sort of, primary source documents, if you will, from conspiracy theorists. But today I thought it would be fun, because yesterday we watched an academic lecture on sovereign citizens, and that was pretty interesting. That was fun to watch together, and informative. So I thought it would be good to kind of do the same thing for conspiracies from time to time. So today I pulled up some different sources, academic and science communicators, academic communicators, I should say, on the topic of conspiracy and delusions and stuff, and we're going to watch those and talk about them and probably have diversions and just have a good time. So, welcome. Cool beans. Let's see what I missed. Oh, we have 2 new emotes. We have a chair emote, and we have a dog whistle emote, which is pretty great. So, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe so you get access to all those cool emotes. I still have to add them to YouTube, because on YouTube, if you have memberships, you get them too. But I still have to add them, because I actually don't know if I can. I might have to delete some old ones, because I have fewer emote slots on YouTube. But we have fewer members on YouTube anyway, so you know how it is. If you are on YouTube, do me a favor and please like the stream. It helps a lot, and it only takes you half a second to click the little thumbs up. So do that if you would. Man, that alert box is absolutely on the wrong level. Give me a sec to mess with the emote cloud. It's gotta be like above everything, basically. Right? Someone do some emotes. Let's see if that worked. I moved its order. There we go. Now it's in front of everything. We got it. So let's see what I missed in chat. Annie Kai, thanks for 33 months. Big Dick Energy, thanks for 6 months. Says, thank you, Baycop, for a gift sub. As I said, we were watching Dr. Newman's yesterday about Sovsits. He mentioned he had one on conspiracy theorists, but I haven't been able to find it. So if you can connect Twitch to Discord, subs can use emotes in the Discord. Okay. I'll look and see how to do that. Thank you for letting me know. Hey Wampa, how's it going? How's everyone on YouTube doing? Professor Strangefinger, JP Black, Manuel, Jen, how you doing? Make sure you like the stream. I'm watching you. Thanks everyone for coming to hang out. And I think that catches us up. So let's get into it. What did I want to do first? How about this one?
A scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks so I can take a look at conspiracy theories and talk about their relationship to the dark triad traits and schizotypy.
See, that's interesting to me because in terms of dark triad traits, there are certain conspiracy theorists that I would certainly connect that to, but I don't know, not generally. But he is just talking about that as he was asked to, so let's hear it.
Now, we talk about conspiracy theories and the belief in conspiracy theories. We know that there's no single agreed-upon definition for a conspiracy theory. And this really makes the phenomenon somewhat difficult to study. So looking at 2 popular definitions, we can kind of see the problem here already. One is, for a conspiracy theory, the unnecessary assumption of conspiracy when other explanations are more probable. Second definition, an unverified and relatively implausible allegation.
It's pronounced de Kenergy, like Vin Di Bona or Nick DiPaolo. Okay, de Kenergy.
Of conspiracy, claiming that the events are the result of a secret plot carried out by a preternaturally sinister...
There's a pretty good, when talking about the definition of a conspiracy theory, because like Dr. Grande says, it is a gray area. I think suspicious, I don't remember if it was Suspicious Minds or Political Paranoia that gave this definition. But one of these, and actually the author of Suspicious Minds is one of the speakers we're probably going to listen to at some point today. It's really great. This is one of my favorite books about conspiracy, because it relates it not just to extreme fringe, colloquially whack jobs, but you and I, day-to-day people, and how we delude ourselves, how our very public consciousness has a tendency towards some conspiratorial explanations and beliefs. Either way, one of these books defined conspiracy theories as a workable definition, not a concrete one, but for the purposes of the book, that I think is pretty good, and it is a belief in a conspiracy that is neither proven nor unproven. Now, that is a term trying to unload it when it kind of feels like it loads it. Some people might assume that implies that, oh, are you saying conspiracy theories are true? No. That definition, I think, is workable because the truth of the conspiracy at hand is irrelevant to what is going on mentally. So it's not so much that you're defining a conspiracy theory by whether it's true or not, but by the behavior of the adherents to said conspiracy. It doesn't matter if what they're believing is true or not. It's the modality through which they thought through how to believe it, or didn't think through analytically. So it's more about how you come to believe something and less the specific of the broad what you believe. But, again, people follow patterns, so you have an idea of what is a conspiracy theory and what is it. It comes down to that, was it Reince Priebus who said, I don't know how to define pornography, but I know it when I see it? Feels like that. And that's never a satisfying answer, but we're talking about, like, human behavior, so sorry, I didn't make people. People made me. Robert Brockacom, thanks for 7 months of membership on YouTube. Great, appreciate it.
And powerful group of people, right? So preternaturally means outside of the natural. It's different than supernatural. So supernatural means an act of God.
Thanks, Booking Dog Man.
Preternatural means just outside.
List of book recommendations. That's kind of why I put these back here, as these are books I recommend. Suspicious Minds, Political Paranoia, Talking to Strangers, I Heard It Through the Grapevine, The United States of Paranoia, The Misinformation Age, The Tipping Point, Behave. There's some interesting stuff in this book, Bullshit, by John Grant, but there's also abject misinformation about it, about a case of a convicted pedophile, so I wouldn't recommend that. And also his prose are dog shit. But it is a conspiracy book I've read, so I put it back here. But the rest are good. Probably ignore Bullshit.
Of nature. So you could have like evil forces that would be preternatural. So either way, we see really the problem here with defining conspiracy theories, as I mentioned. If you look at these two definitions...
I was also reading earlier today. I had therapy earlier, but I also, when I wasn't in therapy, was reading a book that I got. That book that you guys sent me a link to the other day. I forget what it was. Ooh, that was down too far. I did get that paperback from Amazon, and I've been reading it. It's been very good. So thanks for whoever recommended that. Cruelty, thanks for 25 months with your Prime membership. Much appreciated.
Definitions. You see completely different aspects of this construct, right? So if you look at the first definition, that could be almost anybody. An unnecessary assumption of conspiracy when other explanations are more probable. A lot of people do that. With the second definition, that's a much smaller group of people, right? So these people believe in sinister individuals who are out there doing something outside of the natural world.
Thank you, Dr. Darlin Lambchop. Much appreciated for the recommendation. It's good so far.
That is going to cause damage. Now, of those two definitions, I do like the second one a little bit better. I think it taps into the construct of what we mean by a conspiracy theory a little better. And using a definition like that or similar to that, we see that over 50% of Americans believe in at least one conspiracy theory. So conspiracy theories are fairly popular. Now, there are a lot of different conceptualizations about what predicts the belief in a conspiracy theory. One model is that there are three main factors that predict the belief. There's the existential threat, and this really resonates what we see in conspiracy theory thinking. Conspiracy theories are really never innocent, right? They're always some sort of massive threat to humanity or to a lot of people involved in them. For example, we don't see theories about government officials plotting to make ice cream more available, right? It's always something, again, kind of dangerous. The next factor is sense-making processes. So people who believe in conspiracy theories...
What are you being thanked for? Oh, that book you recommended. I got it ordered from Amazon, and it is good so far, so thank you.
Sometimes called conspiracists, they believe that their explanation is the most logical. They believe they've applied a logical, reasonable process, and the conclusion that they have come to is in alignment with what other reasonable people should have come to, right? So people are being fooled, but they're not being fooled. So they believe they're logical, and other people are trying to be logical, but again, they don't know the truth. And the third factor is an antagonist.
You won't be the first ice cream truther. I hate to break it to you and Dr. Grande, but ice cream is a part of the Bed Bath & Beyond conspiracy theory. They believe that ice cream has become a symbol for wealth that Ryan Cohen, Carl Icahn, and the rest of the white hats are going to bestow upon them. So they see ice cream everywhere and assume, kind of in a reverso of how QAnon people or Pizzagate people will see images of pizza and be like, this is a potent of evil. They'll see ice cream and be like, this is a sign that things are good. We're going to do great. So, you know. But, to be clear, that does not undo what he is saying broadly, even within that conspiracy. Yes, they believe ice cream is good, but the broader point about there being an existential threat, very much a part of the meme stock conspiracies as well. They see hedge funds and people like Carl Icahn and believe that they are plotting against them directly. Or not Icahn, sorry, Ken Griffin from Citadel.
Antagonistic outgroup. Again, so this would be the so-called bad guys, the sinister people that are conspiring with each other. Now, just because somebody believes in a conspiracy doesn't make them a conspiracy theorist, right? So generally, for somebody to be considered a conspiracist, they have to believe in several conspiracy theories, they have to actively endorse the conspiracy theories, and at least one of the theories would often, anyway, involve something bizarre or implausible. So this really gets into a comparison within conspiracists, so kind of regular and diehard, I guess, and comparing these two groups to what we call conventionalists. So conventionalists are essentially the opposite of a conspiracist. Conventionalists look at situations and say there is a reasonable explanation that does not involve a conspiracy. Although
I've never heard that term before. That's good. Conventionalist.
Technically, somebody could be a conventionalist and believe that some conspiracies still occur. Remember, we have those different definitions out there for conspiracy theory, so it can get a little bit tricky. So conspiracism is not associated with a lack of knowledge about politics. This is something we hear a lot, like, oh, conspiracy theorists must not understand politics. Actually, research shows that they are just as informed about political facts as conventionalists. In online forums, we see that conspiracists are sometimes painted as more hostile and using more aggressive language. Interestingly, conventionalists tend to be more hostile, in online forums at least. People don't always fit.
I can see that. There's a lot of, like, and I get that. In online spaces, there is a tendency to go towards content because we are all fishing for views. Like, that's the name of the game if you're doing this for a job. I do my best to be honest with what I'm doing. I don't try and sensationalize as best as I can. But, you know, we're all victims of it. That negativity bias on the internet is a very real thing. Like, if you look at so many Flat Earth debunk videos, they're great. And I like doing them, and I like watching them, but also there's that layer of, like, proving them wrong. It's not just about, like, hey, they're wrong. It's, look at how silly this person is. And I get that. Like, I wouldn't, like, this show started a lot more like that, Tinfoil Tuesday and stuff, and there's still certainly, like, levity. But it's easy to get into that, to try and make yourself feel better, or, like, just get cheap laughs off of people, which, I'm not gonna lie, there's an element of that still, because you're looking at very strange beliefs, and I've always been someone who's dealt with kind of uncomfortable things through comedy anyway. So making light of it is fine, as long as you're not disrespecting the human beings that are conspiracy theorists and recognizing mental illness where it exists, and trying to make fun of the beliefs and not the people. But I totally understand where he's coming from. People have a tendency to lash out and mock people who believe different things. Like, of course they do. That's kind of human nature, is people who are in the out group, even if they're in the out group because they happen to be wrong factually, we can be pretty brutal about hurting them, about pushing them away, which I understand why that's a thing, but also it's counterproductive in trying to correct people who are incorrect. Isolation is a big part of how people get into conspiracy theories in the first place. So when you further isolate them, it makes the problem worse. Now, to be clear, you're under no obligation to have relationships with any individual or group of people at all, ever. I'm just saying, broadly, systemically, as a society, if we want to tackle the issue of people who have delusional conspiratorial beliefs, it has to be through a lens of compassion, even when that's hard. And most of the time, it is hard. A lot of them are people who you do not have a lot of sympathy for, who harbor really shitty ideas, if not outright hateful. But there's no way to deal with people without trying to treat them as a human being. You don't have to like them. You can think they're a piece of shit. But if on any level you wanted to reach out to someone and help them, you would have to treat them as a person first. And that's not easy, and I don't expect anyone to be able to do that, especially with hardcore hateful people. But I just don't see any other way if you are trying to reform anyone or get them out of a delusional state, because so many people have that in families and friends. It's a problem.
Clearly into one
Before Hannah went woke. True.
category or another. This is another problem. Looking at the online forums, we see that some conspiracists will argue for a conspiracy. They'll argue in favor of a conspiracy theory. But that same individual will argue against other conspiracy theories. So in a sense, they're only a conspiracist looking at certain theories. They're a conventionalist looking at other theories. So again, categorization and studying these phenomena.
Have I been keeping up with
This becomes
James Tour?
difficult. So with all this in mind, what really qualifies somebody to be a conspiracist?
Should I know who that is?
I think it
off
really
the top of
comes
my head?
down to a few different things, but one key part would be passive versus active endorsement. I talked about that, but there is no set rule, so I'll just offer my opinion here. I'm going to provide some examples here of beliefs that are and are not generally related to being an official or diehard, I guess, conspiracy theorist. So first looking at some beliefs that I think are not associated really with being a true conspiracy theorist. So if somebody believes in high-level corruption, I don't think this is really related to conspiracy theories. Unfortunately, this type of corruption is
He's a big creationist and got laughed at by actual scientists to his face when he tried to rage about cell-based science.
common, so it doesn't really, in my opinion, qualify as a conspiracy theory. If somebody
Oh,
believes
he's a good series debunking? Gotcha.
in one
I've seen Professor Dave from Time, or rather, not Professor Dave, I'm sorry. I haven't seen Professor Dave thing on that. I thought you were talking about this guy for a second, and that was why it got brought up. I have seen Professor Dave. Again, interesting content, informed me a lot about the actual factual incorrect stuff about Flat Earth. But again, it's very, like, owning content, so I find it hard. And again, I'm not, like, I want to be clear. I am not criticizing people who do that. That is content that is completely valid. I'm just trying to think, I don't know. On some level, I have an obsession with this idea of figuring out how to better help conspiracy theorists and delusional people. I know I'm just a streamer on the internet, and I have no, like, hope of doing that. But for some reason, I am just so focused on this idea of what could help people out of this, because it is such a widespread issue that is only getting worse. And with the advent of, like, I'm sure you saw yesterday, OpenAI showed their new, like, video tech for generating, like, completely AI-made videos. Eerie. So many more people are going to be susceptible to fake news, to propaganda, because anyone is going to be able, within, like, 10, 15 years, to produce this stuff by typing a couple sentences into their computer or phone. Like, what do you do when everyone has the power to create fake images and videos of things? It's already so bad with false information, and it's about to get so much worse.
conspiracy theory, and that person has some sort of connection to that theory. That tends to move, I think, away from being a conspiracy theorist. For example, if somebody owns a car and it breaks down when they are driving to a polling place to cast their vote in an election. They might start to believe that the automotive manufacturers are in a conspiracy against the politician that they are going to vote for. Right? If it's isolated to something that they're connected to and something happened to them directly, that could just be a logical error and not necessarily somebody who really truly believes in a number of conspiracy theories. I think if somebody believes in a conspiracy theory that is technically possible and not bizarre in nature, that could mean they're not really a serious conspiracy theorist. For example, people who believe that the government is spying on citizens. We know this has actually happened. So in some cases, yes, it's a conspiracy theory, but in other cases, it's true. Believing in a political conspiracy theory only. So if somebody believes that their political party lost an election because of a conspiracy by the other party, this is actually remarkably common. We see this after many, many elections. So I don't think somebody has to be a true conspiracy theorist to believe this. Now, also...
I know this is a 17-minute video, so he only has so much time, but I feel like a lot of the topics he's saying here encompass multiple things. There are people who are into these things casually, and then there are people who are in them in depth. So I don't think trying to divide by specific topic is helpful as much as intensity and depth of belief. But that's just my, feeling on it. 17 minutes isn't a long time to get to, dissect it, but I get it. Fenekagami says, an element I've noticed when it comes to people we dislike, there's a tendency for all of us to focus on aspects that disgust us more than the parts that are arguably their most harmful. Conservatives do this the most, focusing way more on painting their enemies as disgusting rather than any politics, but leftists do it too. Look at any discourse around Matt Walsh. You're just as likely to see people focus on his diaper fixation or his obsession with teenage girls. I mean, his obsession with teenage girls is a fucking problem. That's about his character. But I do know what you mean. I have seen people, and we've all done this. I'm not immune from this. I've gotten better as I've gotten older and better at my job. But there's a tendency for people to be like, this is a bad person. What can I make fun of? And maybe they'll go for their looks or something like that. Even though the looks have nothing to do with what you're upset with them about. And not only does that a shitty argument in the first place, but not only does it harm the person who, whatever, maybe they're a shitty person, it harms people who aren't that person who maybe have insecurities about whatever trait you're pointing out in that person. Give you an example. How do I put this? Like, teeth. Like, I have bad teeth due to a variety of things. People bring it up from time to time. For the record, I have fine oral hygiene. I brush my teeth twice a day. I floss. I have a water pick. But when I was younger, I didn't get dental care for an extended period of time. For years, I didn't. I drank a lot of soda constantly and wasn't as up on my oral hygiene because, I don't know, my parents just weren't paying as close attention and I was a weird kid. But there's a variety of reasons, you know? Anyway, the point is, if someone else were to make fun of someone who's shitty and be like, look at their teeth, all that would do is make someone who looked like me be upset like, I have bad teeth too. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Looking at non-specificity. So there's this...
And Fenekagami says, Matt's genocidal rhetoric is arguably more harmful, but to continue, I think this disgusting fixation about personalizing our dislike of people, disgust is more personal than cold logical damage assessment. I suppose. People are very emotional, though. Myself included, of course. I want to be clear, I'm never describing things as if I am outside of it.
Item from an instrument that's used to measure belief in conspiracy.
Anyway, so I have been, what I was going to say was I have been to a dentist. My actual, health is fine. I had a gum infection at one point, but, got it treated. My teeth are just that color. It's not a health thing. I'd love to get them fixed. I'd love to get them, whitened, but that costs money, so.
Theories. And the item says, much of what happens in the world today is decided by a small and secretive group of individuals. Well, that's not really specific, and we see that over 50% of people endorse this statement, so I don't really associate this, again, with being kind of a die-hard conspiracist. And the last one here would be a weak endorsement of or a weak attitude toward a conspiracy theory. So essentially not believing it all the way. So if somebody says that they believe it's more likely than not that there was no moon landing, that's not really committing to the belief. So now moving to the side of the official or die-hard conspiracy theorist. What do they believe typically? Well, we see a few different things here. They tend to believe
The
conspiracy
entire
theories that
world.
were made up by researchers.
The entire world is made up of people controlling it. There's a high-up puppet master, and people in academia are lying to you.
Right? We see papers that talk
I
about
got you, Fennikagami. I got you.
this, where researchers just completely made up a conspiracy theory. No one believed this conspiracy theory. It wasn't an official one. It wasn't out there anyway. And people who tended to believe in other conspiracy theories believed in it. So that's leading more toward the serious side. We see believing in conspiracy theories that are mutually contradictory, right? I've seen this many times. For example, somebody who believes that lizard people are in control of the government and Hollywood, but there's also a secret society who's in control of the government and Hollywood.
Usually, in my experience, they'll try and justify this by saying that the quote-unquote cabal members, or whatever, the people that they deem to be celebrities that aren't reptilians, politicians, they're political and ideological enemies, that aren't reptilians work for the reptilians, kind of like a vampire thrall, or like in the movie They Live, when there were the humans that were working for the interdimensional blue vein face aliens. They're collaborators, basically. Again, of course, it doesn't make it any more or less true. It's not true. But they often do justify these contradictory points, at least after confronted with them.
Well, you can't have the lizards and the humans both in control, right? Somebody's got to be in control. Somebody has to be in charge. So those are really contradictory. It's either the lizards or the humans, right? And again, I've seen many people actually who believe in both. And when kind of confronted about the inconsistency, typically they can't offer really much of an explanation there. So they're kind of missing the fact that they're contradictory. Now, another one here would be believing in conspiracy theories that have bizarre content. So the government is hiding evidence that there are aliens walking around the planet, or the earth is flat, or something that has kind of a magical thinking, bizarre element. And I'll talk about that in a moment when I get to schizotypy. So I think that's more on the diehard side. And the last one I'll list here would be the belief did not originate from a rational evaluation of evidence related specifically to conspiracy theories in which the person believes. Rather, we see a general tendency to believe in conspiracy theories. Now, this concept is called conspiracist ideation, and sometimes it's called conspiratorial thinking. It's often using this element that conspiracy theories are studied, right? People who kind of invest in this particular thinking. They tend to believe in several conspiracy theories, not really rationally evaluating evidence. So many people think of conspiracy theories as relatively harmless, and some appear to be. Like if somebody believes that there was no moon landing, that's not necessarily obviously destructive. Others, however, are fairly destructive. For example, declining vaccination rates have been attributed to vaccination-related conspiracy beliefs.
I wonder if there'll be any big incident that causes, like, a bounce back on that. How are, like, I gotta imagine there are plenty of kids who have, like, I don't know, millennial crunchy parents who didn't want to get them vaccinated. Are they thrilled about that? Probably not. At least a decent number of them. I don't know. I just hope there's a sort of social, like, bounce back to everyone recognizing, like, oh no, vaccines are good.
Also,
Oh, I know measles are back. I know.
belief in conspiracy theories can lead to social and political disengagement. So it might be bad for society for a lot of people to
I'm just
believe in
waiting for polio.
conspiracy theories.
Once polio gets endemic, maybe people start taking vaccines seriously after they see the new, I don't know, eye lung from Apple.
But it's also bad for the individual who believes
It's a decent iron lung joke, I think, for the 21st century. I'm a trailblazer.
in the conspiracy theories. Now, belief in conspiracy theories is related to paranoia, low trust, receptivity to unusual beliefs, schizotypy, belief in the paranormal, although this relationship is actually fairly weak, high openness to experience, and low agreeableness. And these have been contested as well. Now, looking specifically at low agreeableness, this leads us to
We
the
think that they have low agreeableness. I don't agree.
idea of the dark triad traits, because low agreeableness is common to all three of those traits: narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. So this kind of leads me specifically to answering the question about conspiracy theorists and schizotypy and dark triad traits. Now, I used several articles to help make this video, and one specific article really looked at the question of schizotypy and the dark triad traits. I'll put the references for all the articles.
Who is this? This is Dr. Grande. He's I don't know if he's actually a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Either way, he talks about different mental health related things, and here he is talking about conspiracies.
In the description for this video. But in this one article, again specifically looking at this topic, we see they performed a regression using odd beliefs and magical thinking from schizotypy, and also narcissism, both grandiose and vulnerable, psychopathy, both primary and secondary, and Machiavellianism. So all these variables were loaded in the regression as predictor variables, and the outcome variable was conspiracy theory beliefs. So they wanted to see kind of what the contribution was of all these variables to having conspiracy theory beliefs.
Okay, so basically, if you didn't get that, they took a bunch of personality traits and looked at people who have high conspiratorial beliefs and looked at which of these traits is most likely to be correlative with someone who is very into conspiracy, who thinks conspiratorially.
It's the variance that each of these predictor variables explained in conspiracy theory beliefs. And what we see here is
uses terms that are outdated, like what?
That 55% of the variance.
I'm genuinely asking, by the way. I don't want to say anything that's outdated. I'm assuming he went to school some years ago, so that would probably explain if he's using outdated terms, which he should update, but, you know.
Of conspiracy theory beliefs were explained by odd thinking, magical beliefs, Machiavellianism, and primary psychopathy. So these are really interesting findings.
What's Machiavellianism? Machiavellianism is basically a personality trait named after Machiavelli that implies that you are scheming. You sort of work behind the scenes to manipulate situations so that you win. You're manipulating everyone, unbeknownst to everyone, in order to try and puppet people. Puppet master type stuff. You're puppet mastering. You have schemes.
So that's quite a bit of variance, and it's interesting in terms of what explained the variance, but it's also interesting in terms of what didn't explain a statistically significant amount of variance. So kind of breaking this down and looking at these, starting with odd thinking and magical beliefs. We see this as one of the characteristics of schizotypy and of schizotypal personality disorder, which is a cluster A personality disorder in the DSM. Now, schizotypy is considered to be kind of on a continuum with schizophrenia. So it goes from paranoid personality traits to schizoid personality traits to schizotypal personality traits, and then moves to schizophrenia. That's kind of how we think of it.
Disorder.
So it kind of makes sense that odd thinking and magical beliefs would have kind of this delusional component to them. And we know that these beliefs can become morbid with delusional thinking. Now, we also see specifically with this item that conspiracy theories may offer a sense of control over the unexplained.
Gillis Filler says, literally it's cunning, scheming, and unscrupulous. In psychology, it's a particular thing. Thank you for getting the actual wording.
Right, so somebody has odd thinking, they have magical beliefs.
In regard to Machiavellianism.
They want to know they have some control over that which they really can't explain, and conspiracy theories kind of fill that gap. They kind of satisfy that need. Now, moving to Machiavellianism, when I was reading this finding, this one really didn't make a lot of sense to me, right? So there's this cynical component with Machiavellianism. Because somebody's cynical, they might believe that other people would be involved in a conspiracy because they might do the same thing if they had a chance to be. They might think of themselves as being one of those government officials who's capable of conducting this type of conspiracy. So I guess cynical kind of connects a little bit. In terms of the strategic and opportunistic components of Machiavellianism, I don't really see how there's much to gain by believing in a conspiracy theory, so these don't seem to line up for me anyway. Now, people who are Machiavellianistic tend to view people as foolish and possibly as being inferior. So it's really easy for them to picture other people as being the victims of a sophisticated government plot, for example. So I guess this component is fairly consistent with this finding. And we see that people who are Machiavellianistic are prone to manipulate others. And because of this tendency, they may be worried about being manipulated themselves. So by believing in a conspiracy theory, they're kind of making a preemptive strike, right? They're reaching out and distrusting people and maybe even trying to manipulate people rather than being the victim of that behavior. Now we move to primary psychopathy. This one I don't really see.
Hey,
I mean, I know the research findings had it connected, but I don't really see the connection here. Maybe it has something to do with the overlap between primary psychopathy and Machiavellianism. So again, seeing people is easy to manipulate. So it makes sense that people in the government would be manipulating others. That's the only thing I can really see that connects. It's hard for me to really see how people who are psychopathic would be too interested in conspiracy theories. So again, I didn't really connect with this one. Now, in terms of the characteristics that aren't related, right? And again, I think these are just as interesting. Secondary psychopathy was not related at all. So people don't believe.
Thank you, Phoenix. Mitchology says Machiavellis should properly be defined as the irresistible urge to write at length about a job you failed to ever get because you were underqualified.
Believe in conspiracy theories because of something like impulsivity. Now, in terms of narcissism, we see no relationship here between grandiose or vulnerable. Now, prior research has shown that grandiose narcissism was related, but again, this study says it's not. And vulnerable narcissism, I'm not aware of any studies that connect that to conspiracy theory beliefs. So what I find interesting about this, with the secondary psychopathy and both types of narcissism, is this really means that there's no relationship between conspiracy theorists and cluster B personality pathology. We don't see anything connecting to antisocial personality disorder. That would be the secondary psychopathy. Nothing connected to...
Was he shitty about Jordan Peterson losing his license?
Personality disorder.
That's fucking funny.
That would be the grandiose narcissism. Nothing connected to borderline personality disorder. That would have some connection over to vulnerable narcissism. And of course, we don't see anything with histrionic. Histrionic personality disorder isn't really studied that much, so I'd be surprised if anybody even tried to make the connection in research to even study it in the first place. Now, interestingly, because of that lack of a relationship with vulnerable narcissism, that means that conspiracy theories are probably not connected to cluster C personality pathology either, so avoidant dependent and obsessive compulsive personality disorders. So when we look at conspiracy theorists, we're really looking at potentially cluster A personality pathology, schizotypy, but nothing from cluster B and cluster C. Usually, again, this research is looking at tendencies. So I know whenever I talk about topics like conspiracy theories, there'll be a variety of opinions. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate a really interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found this description of conspiracy theories, schizotypy, and the dark triad traits to be interesting. Thanks for watching.
Well, good to know. I'll avoid his stuff from now on. I'm gonna pull up, I think... Let's do the guy who wrote one of my favorite conspiracy books. It is long, so I don't know how much we'll get through or if we'll end up speeding it up or what, but he did a talk at Cambridge. Yes, his name is Rob Brotherton, and he wrote Suspicious Minds. Great book. Would recommend. It's on Audible, also available on paperback and all that. You know how books work. You know where to buy books.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this event, which is the latest one put on by the Conspiracy and Democracy.
Like yesterday, I'm going to skip the intro. No offense to this guy. I'm sure his intro is fabulous.
So thank you for coming.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. And first of all, thank you very much to everybody at the project for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here and to be a small part of such an interesting and productive project. And thank you all for coming tonight. So I am a science writer. I wrote a book called Suspicious Minds, Why We Believe Conspiracy Theories. But my day job is I'm an academic psychologist. And so I'd like to begin with a thought experiment. I'd like you to play along, if you would. I want you to imagine that it's the late 1960s. So the Cold War is heating up. The space race is reaching a crescendo. I'd like you to imagine that you work for NASA, and you are part of the team that's been tasked with putting man on the moon. Towards the beginning of the decade, President Kennedy had said that...
Can we watch Mickey after this? What do you mean?
By the end of the decade...
Who? Did I have someone pulled up in particular? That's me. Was it someone else I had pulled up that I don't recognize the name of? Either way, let me know.
The United States would put man on the moon, not because it was easy, but because it was hard.
In happy news, Donald Trump has been fined nearly $350 million and is banned from doing business in New York for 3 years. Not enough, but sure, I'll take it.
But imagine
Mickey Atkins, lady with her eyes closed, was it? Gotcha. Yeah, after this we can.
that it turns out that it's really hard, much harder than anybody had anticipated. Suppose it's going to take years, at least, to put people on the moon, get them back safely. So this is bad news. This looks bad for the United States. The Soviets already put the first satellite in space. They already put the first human in space, and it looks like they're going to beat us to the moon as well. Bad news. But then suppose orders come down from above. We've changed the plan. We're going to fake the moon landing. So we've already booked the soundstage. We've rented the fake moon rock. Stanley Kubrick's agreed to direct. Nobody will ever know. So I want you to imagine all this is true and ask yourself, would you do it? Would you take part in a conspiracy to fake the moon landing? Should we do a show of hands? Is anybody willing to admit that they would fake the moon landing?
I've never actually thought about this before. I guess it depends on my role. Am I me in the 50s, or am I a 50s person who has 50s beliefs? Because I feel like in the 50s there'd be people who'd be like, I'll do it to fight the commies. Like, I don't know. But if I'm me now, it'd probably be fun. I mean, I don't know.
Few people.
Either way, I don't think that would, and he's of course not a conspiracy theorist, he's using this as a thought experiment. But either way, you would never find a group of people that would 100% say yes and never whistle blow. So.
Oh, impressive. The thing about this kind of question is that the people who really would probably aren't going to admit it in front of a room of strangers, right? So we don't really know the answer. But that's the thought experiment.
Yes, if they want to hire me to help fake a Mars landing, I'm with you. I'm there. I'll be the conspiracy consultant that tries to point out things that conspiracy theorists would notice, and then also I'll plant fake evidence that conspiracy theorists will focus on instead of the real evidence that you're faking it. I will ask for $1 million.
This is based on a study that was published a few years ago by psychologists at University of Kent, Professor Karen Douglas and Robbie Sutton. And this is essentially what they asked their participants to do. Imagine that under the circumstances, would you have faked the moon landing? For good measure, they also asked, would you have killed Princess Diana? Would you fake climate change data? Would you manufacture the AIDS virus? And would you cover up the existence
Only 1 million? I mean, it's a government contract. I gotta undercut.
Of extraterrestrials. If you find yourself in the circumstances, would you take part in these conspiracies? And reassuringly, most of the people who took part in the study said that they wouldn't, under any circumstances, wouldn't dream of it. But there were a few people who said that they might be willing to take part in these kind of conspiracies. And there was an interesting thing about those people who said that they might be willing to conspire, because the researchers also asked, not only would you take part in these conspiracies, but do you think the conspiracy theories are true? Do you think the moon landing really was faked? Do you think Princess Diana was killed by the Queen or somebody? And the interesting thing was that the people who said, yeah, I reckon the moon landing might be true, the hoax might be true, they were the people who said, yeah, I'm maybe more willing to take part in a conspiracy like that. There's a correlation between willingness to conspire and belief in the conspiracy theories.
We tend to believe that people behave like ourselves. If you are a person who is scheming, you'll be more likely to assume someone else is a schemer. You see this over and over again, like the trope of someone whose partner is like really paranoid and constantly obsessing about whether or not they're cheating, and then it turns out the person who was obsessing was the cheater because they did something wrong and their paranoia makes them believe that the other person's doing the thing. They're projecting guilt outwards.
And so what the authors of the study argue is that this reflects a psychological tendency that we call projection. When it comes to conspiracy theories like these, we don't have firm facts, so we can't just look in like the history books and stuff like that. So we have to look elsewhere.
I have not seen this talk, by the way. I've read his book, haven't seen this talk. So
When
I
we're
assume it'll go over a lot of the stuff from his book.
How plausible or implausible a conspiracy theory is, we have to look elsewhere. And one of the things that we can do in uncertain situations like this is we can think about ourselves and think about other people. And we tend to project our own personal tendencies and beliefs onto other people. And so
Hello,
the people
Bruno
who think,
Castlefield.
would I take part in this conspiracy under the circumstances? Maybe yeah. Then they project that belief, that tendency outwards onto everybody else. They think the world is full of budding conspirators. And so then the logic runs that if the world is full of potential conspirators, then it's more likely that historically some of these people have gone through with the conspiracies. It's more likely that the moon landing really was faked. And so this is one
Kagami says, also apparently Trump is trying to get his daughter-in-law as co-chair of the RNC, and she stated if she gets into the position, she will direct all RNC funds to getting Trump elected, which likely means Republican campaigns are going to be even more bankrupt, and like the RNC will start running out of money because Trump's going to use them to pay his legal fees. Honestly, that would be a hilarious thing. That would be quite funny.
Psychological finding that has emerged recently from the literature. The investigation of the psychology behind conspiracy theories has only really begun. It's only taken off within the last 5 or 10 years or so. But this is one of the findings that's emerged, and there are various other interesting psychological findings that we've discovered over the last few years. And later on in the talk, I'll give a quick overview of some of those findings. But first of all, I think it's worth thinking about a more basic issue. Just what do we mean when we say conspiracy theory? What do we mean when we use that label? And so I'd like to show you two claims, two statements, and I'd ask you to think about whether you think they deserve the label conspiracy theory. So first of all, if you can read it. This says, members of the United States government planned...
Thank you for the link. For those who didn't see, Chile, we did a sob sit yesterday. Chile de Castro got arrested again. So that's a thing that happened.
Executed the 9/11 attacks. Do you think?
Bailey 16 and Bruno Castlefield followed at the exact same time, so I'm guessing it's the same person talking to themselves. Just an FYI to chat. They haven't done anything ban-worthy yet, but like, I can see when people follow, and it was like the exact same moment both accounts followed, so you're probably the same person talking to yourself for some weird reason, which is a bizarre thing to spend your time doing, by the way. Yeah, here we go.
We should call that a conspiracy theory? Some people, some nods. Here's another statement. Members of Al-Qaeda planned and executed the 9/11 attacks. Do you think we should call that a conspiracy theory?
Yes.
Some people? A little bit more split over that one? Yeah, so this is what I find when I ask audiences...
Your name is Bruno, correct, and the other person's name is Bailey, and you both followed at the same time, and then immediately had an interaction together. I don't know, it's not impossible that you're different people, it's just... I've done this for a while.
People would agree that saying the US government...
No, Bush did not do 9/11.
...did 9/11, that is a conspiracy theory. But when it comes to saying that Al-Qaeda did 9/11, it's a little bit more split. Most people say that we probably shouldn't call that a conspiracy theory. Some people say yes. But the point is that, well, what is the difference between these two statements? They're virtually identical, right, on the surface of it. The only difference between them is in the villain, who is allegedly responsible for this conspiracy. Well, they both postulate conspiracies, right? They both say that a successful conspiracy took place. And yet, there's a division of opinion. Some people say that one of these claims we should call a conspiracy theory, the other one we shouldn't. And so when it comes to using this label, how we define a conspiracy theory, it must be something a little bit deeper. It must be something below the surface, right? It must be something in the logic, the structure, the evidence behind the claims that causes some people to call one a conspiracy theory, but not another. And so this issue of defining conspiracy theory is often kind of glossed over, especially within the psychological literature. People don't really tend to think too much about the definition, and I think that's because we all have kind of an intuitive definition, right? When we hear the term conspiracy theory, we know what people are talking about. We all kind of know one when we see one, but as those two statements illustrate, I hope you'll understand it's a little bit more tricky than that. And so in my book, Suspicious Minds, I spend a chapter thinking about the definition. What is a conspiracy theory? And I think that there isn't really a precise, succinct definition because there are too diverse a category of explanations for things. But I think there are features, there are characteristics that we can look for that can help us identify conspiracy theories or explain why some claims are called conspiracy theories, but not others. And so these are some of the features that I think are important. First, there are a couple of features of the alleged conspirators. And so we can ask, are the conspirators unusually evil? Part of what makes defining conspiracy theory tricky is that we know conspiracies do occur in the world, right? There are real conspiracies, nobody's arguing that. But in the real world, the motives of the conspirators, their intent, what they want to achieve with their conspiracy tends to be fairly...
Alright. That's enough leeway. I'm done entertaining this. Wow, an account created... What was that? 5 days ago. Incredible.
limited, right? And fairly petty. It tends to be they want to make some money for themselves, increase their paycheck, stuff like that. But when it comes to at least prototypical conspiracy theories, they usually go pretty far beyond that. They allege, at the very least, that the conspirators have a kind of pathological disregard for individual well-being and liberty. And at the other end of the spectrum, they propose that there's this all-encompassing global conspiracy to enslave us all or kill us all off. So I think it's fair to say that that is unusually evil. And a second feature that I think we should look for is, are they unusually competent? Are they unusually good at conspiring? Again, conspiracies happen in the world, but at least the ones that we know about, they don't tend to stay secret for very long because people can't keep secrets that well. It's difficult to plan and execute such complex conspiracies like that. And yeah, in the world of conspiracy theory, the conspirators, the alleged conspirators, are usually able to make and execute these elaborate plans perfectly, keep it secret afterwards. And so I think it's fair to say that they are unusually competent. Other features I think we should look for have to do with the evidence that is used to support conspiracy theories. And so we can ask, is it based on anomaly hunting? By which I mean that conspiracy theories, prototypical conspiracy theories, they're usually not based on solid, what we call positive evidence. Rather, they're based on finding anomalies, things, observations that don't immediately seem to fit with what they often call the official story. And
yeah, that's actually a good point. I'm sure that's in his book, but for some reason I didn't remember that. The idea that it's not about positive claims, but more about, here's a thing that I don't understand, and then pontificating and just imagining what might explain it. Yeah, that makes sense. Profane Priestess is spending my last bits to say today's my 2-year anniversary with DM Trey, and we met in your chat, so thanks for that, Hannah. I owe you dinner if you're ever in town. Congratulations. Congrats to both of you. That's wonderful.
And then filling in the gaps, tracing the connections between the dots into the outline of a conspiracy.
And DM Trey says, hey Hannah and chat, wanted to say thank you to this amazing community for bringing my partner and myself together. We've been dating 2 years. Congrats. I hope you have a wonderful anniversary.
Is it unproven? And I think this might be one of the more nuanced and easily misunderstood features, because there's a lot of people seem to use the label in the sense that a conspiracy theory is a claim that is false, right? It's demonstrably false. Sometimes they use it to say that claim is ridiculous, that we shouldn't even entertain it. And so there's this common perception, or common usage, I think, that says conspiracy theories are false. But that's problematic if you think about it for a while, because false according to who, right? We're just kind of offsetting the question of who is the authority that we should outsource this question of whether this theory is true to. And, you know, in the world of conspiracy theories, people don't often trust authorities that much. So it's kind of problematic. But that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that the claims have not lived up to some external scientific criteria of proof. I'm saying something a bit more nuanced, which is that woven into the claims themselves is they're saying that they are unproven currently, that there is a conspiracy.
No, there's a good reason to bring that up, Wampa. I understand that when we're talking about conspiracies, we tend to talk about the fringe, but like, what he's saying is that when we're talking about conspiracy theories definitionally and what constitutes a conspiracy theory, it doesn't matter what's true or false when we're describing this. It matters how someone comes to it. You could hypothetically come up with a conspiracy theory that happened to come to the right conclusion. It would still be a conspiracy theory, if that makes sense. A conspiracy theory isn't in the conspiracy, it's in the theory. It's in how you have come to a conclusion as opposed to the conclusion itself. Generally, there is a correlation in that the vast majority, the vast 99.9999999%, you know, they're not true. But that's not the point, because a conspiracy theorist is never going to agree with you on that, because they're a conspiracy theorist. So the point isn't whether or not it's true, it's about pointing out that these things can be determined not as a quality of factual truth or false, but more about how one comes to understand their reality. How do they come to believe the things they do? What is their analytical style? It's not about the fact that they think, you know, the moon landing was fake. It's what makes them believe that. The belief leads to false conclusions, but it's the process that makes the conspiracy theory, not the end.
That's still ongoing in some sense. It hasn't been fully revealed, and therefore inherently conspiracy theories are unproven. They're saying that there's something that we don't know. They're always looking just over the horizon, around the next corner. They're inherently speculative. And finally, another feature of the logic of conspiracy theories is that they can't be proven to be false. This is a different issue from being unproven. This is saying that there's no evidence that we could discover from the world that could prove a conspiracy theory to be false, because they're inherently speculative. They're saying we don't know something. It's very hard to prove a negative, right? And so
like the conspiracy that the CIA sold crack to black communities versus the truth that resulted in basically the same thing.
The evidence that we would find in the world, if it seems to be consistent.
Generally, there are more nuance to situations, even if you have a broad understanding of a topic. The simple statement like that makes it so reductive to the point of being false, or at least being an incomplete understanding.
Conspiracy theory, well, that's great, right? That's proof of the conspiracy. If there's evidence that seems to go against the conspiracy, well, that's what we'd expect, because the conspirators are trying to throw us off the trail. They're throwing out disinformation to mislead us. And if there's just no evidence at all, well, again, we'd expect that, because they're covering it up, right? That just means they're doing their job. And so in that sense, there's no way that we can prove a conspiracy theory to be false. Now, I would point out that this feature of unfalsifiability and all the other features I mentioned, they don't mean that a claim that demonstrates these features is necessarily false. It could still
Agreed.
be true,
I like his style,
even
too.
if it's unfalsifiable.
It looks like he's into Green Day.
It's unproven. Sometimes conspiracies do turn out to be true. But I think it's fair to say that the more of these features and the more that they demonstrate, more that the claim demonstrates these features, the more skeptical we should be, right? So I think that's, again, it's not a perfect definition, but I think it's useful. It lets us know roughly what we're looking at when we call something a conspiracy theory. And then secondly, now that we know what we're talking about, another issue that's worth thinking about, a basic issue, is just why should we care about conspiracy theories? Why do we need to fund projects that research conspiracy theories? What's the harm if people want to believe unproven, unfalsifiable theories about unusually evil, competent conspirators? Why should we care? But there are a couple of...
Become easily manipulated. There's that saying about if you can believe absurdities, you can commit atrocities. Having a bad worldview in terms of its incompatibility with reality is just generally not a good survival strategy or a path to a happy life. Anti-vax mentality, stuff like that.
Reasons why I think it's important to understand conspiracy theories. One of the reasons is just that they're so prevalent, much more so than people think. There's a stereotype of conspiracy theorists as being, you know...
No, this was recorded... Oh, wait, no. Actually, let me take a look. You're right. This is older than I thought.
Handful of deluded kooks in their parents.
Is my edition of this prior to that too? Let me look. When did my edition of his book come out? I don't know if the foreword was different. Yeah, there's editions before that too.
Parents' basements, on obscure internet forums, wearing tinfoil hats. But this stereotype really doesn't hold up. There have been quite a few surveys over the years looking at how many people agree with various conspiracy theories, and the numbers vary between surveys, but they're consistently quite high. So for example, 57%, over half of people claim to believe that other people were involved in the assassination of JFK. Again, this figure has varied over the years from around 9 out of 10 Americans to around half of Americans, something like that. But it's a substantial proportion. Often, a majority of people think there was a conspiracy behind the assassination of JFK.
Here's the link.
A little bit over a third of people say that they think climate change is a scientific fraud.
37%. That's depressing. Wonder what that's at now. Midnight, thanks for 35 months, says, wow, 31 years of watching Hannah. 31-month streak.
Again, around a third of people think that the United States government, allowed or assisted the 9/11 attacks. Around a fifth of people think the government's covering up.
36%? Jesus Christ. I saw a survey from, I really hope that this was just a bad poll or something, but I've seen multiple polls now that show something like 1/5 of Gen Z is into at least some form of, like, Holocaust denial or revisionism. Like, absolute, don't like that.
42% of people think that the government knew about Pearl Harbor in advance. A little bit over a quarter of people think that there's a secretive power elite with a globalist agenda conspiring to rule the world, this New World Order idea. And according to this survey, asking about whether lizard people control our societies, position themselves in positions of power, 4% of Americans agreed with that statement, according to one survey. A further 7% said they just weren't sure whether that's true or not.
7%.
These figures are all from the States, but it's a kind of similar proportion of people in Britain who believe these kind of conspiracy theories.
28% for the New World Order is terrifying, and this video is from 7 years ago, and I don't know if those statistics are like, I don't know how old they were at the time he wrote the book, because I think I remember these statistics from the first parts of the book, too. I'd imagine it's higher now, right? Conspiracies have gone way more mainstream than even back when he wrote this book, which was like 2015, 2016. QAnon didn't even pop up until 2017.
And so again, the point is that they are widespread. It's not just people in tinfoil hats, it's pretty much everybody who's receptive to one conspiracy theory or another, and often people are receptive to many different conspiracy theories. Again, I should point out that
I do often wonder what conspiracies the people in my chat believe. Just because statistically, some of you believe some of them, you know?
I don't want to give a false sense of precision with
Radiology says, good news, a friend who believes a lot of woo and was starting to get into Masons sacrificing kids conspiracies managed to get off that path. Also, I managed to convince a couple of people that actually humans did build the pyramids in Egypt. Oh, good job. Good job. You've told you, what was yours again, Harold Elberman?
With these precise percentages, the exact number of people who believe any conspiracy theory varies between surveys, depending on exactly how you ask the question and who
Epstein didn't kill himself is a common one.
you're asking, when you're asking them.
Prakagam says, can't believe in conspiracies if head truly empty. Funny.
But conspiracy theories are widespread, and that's
Marcus Drake says, the only conspiracy I can think of is that I don't believe James Earl Ray killed MLK, but I don't know who did. Fair.
one reason why I think it's important to understand where they come from. There must be something psychologically interesting going on here. But another reason why
We have a selection bias. The number's not going to match the general population. I understand what you're saying. I would imagine we have a lower likelihood, but there are still people who believe conspiracies. Like the Epstein thing, I'm not even saying I disagree. I think it's incredibly sus. But that is a conspiracy. If you believe that Epstein didn't kill himself, that's a conspiracy theory. It's unproven. You could certainly say, this is weird, this is weird, this is weird, and you might even be right. But it's still a conspiracy theory because you don't have evidence beyond that. Again, it's not about whether something's right or wrong. We don't know. In this particular case, it's about how you came to those conclusions, and they're entirely based off sort of circumstantial, strange things. That's what makes it a non-concrete belief. It's a very strange thing.
I think it's important to understand conspiracy theories is that sometimes
Oh, we're on a hype train, 60% to level 1. Stone Corbell, thanks for gifting a sub.
they can have consequences. They can influence people's decisions, their behavior, how they live their lives. And one example of a conspiracy theory having consequences has to do with vaccines. I'm sure you've all heard the idea that the MMR vaccine causes autism. This idea surfaced in the late
I wonder if Andrew Wakefield ever feels bad about what he wrought upon this fucking world with him really kicking off anti-vax stuff. Rachology says, bad news, the friend got out because they're fundamentally a good person who finds it difficult to hate, and I convinced the people by having spent hundreds of hours understanding the evidence and having the ability to lay that evidence out in a one-to-one situation. I'm glad that you were able to help that friend. Sometimes helping one person is enough. It's more than most people can do. So take that as a win.
Late 1990s, thanks to a British doctor called Andrew Wakefield. No longer a doctor, he had his...
Not sure how well a lot of those solutions scale up. You did what you could in the people in your life, and that's enough. You don't have to create systemic change. You're not the system. You can work towards it, but in your personal life, you did what you could. You were a friend. And that's a lot. Don't undersell that. Good job.
License withdrawn in the UK. But he claimed to have found evidence that the MMR vaccine was somehow damaging the intestines of children and traveling through their bloodstreams into their brain and causing autism. His data didn't support that. In fact, it's since been withdrawn by the journal it was published in, but he went to the media. The claims got a lot of attention. It became the most widely covered news story of the early 2000s.
Oh, I know there've always been, like, anti-vaxxers since the beginning of, like, medical vaccination. I absolutely understand that. But Andrew Wakefield gave it a credibility that it had not been lent prior. Like, he ended up getting shit, like, on the news. Like, he didn't create the anti-vax movement, but he made it mainstream. He lent false credibility to it.
In the British media. And conspiracy theories have surrounded this idea since it emerged, saying that doctors know about this harm and that they're covering it up, or the government's covering it up to ensure profits for the medical industry. Conspiracy theories have helped the idea to persist long after it's been shown to be false. There are many large, well-conducted studies that show there's no link between the MMR vaccine or any other vaccine and autism. What you might not know is that this wasn't the first time that conspiracy theories had surrounded vaccines. In fact, over the years, basically every vaccine that's been used has been accused of causing some kind of harm, often with conspiracy theories surrounding it. So, for example, the pertussis vaccine was accused of causing epilepsy.
Skipazoa, thanks for 100 bits, 70% to level 1 with a minute left on the hype train.
This vaccine has been accused of causing diabetes. Hepatitis B vaccine has been accused of causing sudden infant death syndrome, HPV of causing blood clots, and going all the way back to the very first vaccine, the smallpox vaccine, there were people at the time who claimed that the smallpox vaccine would turn you into a cow, that people who
That one's true.
received it would start growing horns and scurrying around on all fours and mooing like a cow.
Stone Corbell, thanks for gifting a sub, and Minty Treasure with 200 bits saves the hype train. Thank you very much, over level 1.
And this wasn't some kind of metaphor. There were people who literally said this was true, that you would start growing horns. This is an etching from the British...
Reminds me now of the anti-vax people who are really into it, who claim that, like, we're not human anymore because we took, you know, the vaccines and stuff. Incredibly funny out there beliefs. I say funny. It's funny in the detached sense. It's horrifying in the social implication sense.
Museum of a lady who received the smallpox vaccine and allegedly grew horns. And this might sound quaint and ridiculous to us, right? The idea that a vaccine could cause you to turn into a cow. But it's been pointed out by medical experts like Dr. Paul Offit, who's written about anti-vaccinationists, that the claim that the MMR vaccine somehow damages children's
No more bills, only moo.
intestines, travels through their blood, damages their brain, is exactly as plausible, biologically speaking, as the claim that the smallpox vaccine can turn you into a cow, which is to say, not biologically plausible at all. And there's no evidence behind it, but the conspiracy theories can help these kind of ideas to survive long after they've been disproved. So anti-vaccine conspiracy theories are one example of conspiracy theories having tangible consequences. Another example has to do with terrorism and violence. So there have been quite a few examples of people who have been influenced by their belief in a government conspiracy to take action against that conspiracy. People like Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, who bombed a federal building in the 1990s, Andrews Breivik, who shot dozens of children, and the Tsarnaev brothers, who carried off the Boston bombing. All these people were people who thought that there was some kind of government conspiracy and that they were fighting against that conspiracy. So the vaccine conspiracy
Mom on
theories
YouTube,
and
thanks for
the
subscribing.
decisions people make based off them, I think that's based on people's concern for themselves and the people who they're closest to. But some conspiracy theories have a darker side. These conspiracy theories are based on our fears and our prejudices of other people. And there's no better example of conspiracy theories motivating people to take drastic action than anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, which have been around for centuries. Almost since the advent of Christianity, there have been anti-Semitic conspiracy theories saying that Jewish people were poisoning Christian drinking wells or that they were abducting Christian babies. These ideas, these conspiracy theories have swirled around for centuries, and they kind of came to a head with a pamphlet called The Protocols of the Learned Elders of
You
Zion.
can argue World War
which,
II
if
was
you
a
haven't heard of
consequence of
it-
conspiracies. Oh, a ton of it. Fascism, Hitler's rise to power in particular, was driven by conspiratorial rhetoric. I don't know why, I feel like this doesn't get talked about nearly enough. If anyone has ever listened to like a Hitler speech in English or any language you speak, it's conspiratorial shit. Like the entire rhetoric around the anti-Semitic stuff, which was such a driving force of fascism as a primary enemy of the German state, like in their view, this insurmountable but also weak enemy was integral to the rise to power of the Nazis. But I feel like the role of conspiracies in the rise of the Third Reich is not discussed enough. It's kind of frustrating to me, but whatever. Mike Max with 32 months says it's like how people that believe that rock, I think that's supposed to be rock, and music will corrupt the youth ended up being corrupted by Fox News and Facebook. 24% to level 2 with a minute left.
It was a pamphlet emerged in the early 1900s that was allegedly a transcript of a meeting that occurred between Jewish elites who were planning their conspiracy for world domination.
It was actually a forgery plagiarized from several different sources. I would say fun fact, but it's not a fun fact. It's just sad. Starry Beauty, thanks for gifting a sub.
They were outlining their plan, basically, for how they were going to enslave the world. It was a fraud, obviously. There was no such meeting, no such elders of Zion. It was a fraud, but the Protocols of Zion kind of swept Europe, especially in between the First World War and the Second World War, gained a lot of traction. And Adolf Hitler was an admirer of the Protocols of Zion. He talked about Jewish people, on the one hand, in disparaging terms. He compared them.
Hitler specifically liked the version that was published by Henry Ford. The Ford from, you know, the automobile manufacturing company. Rageology with 50 bits says, one of the many things that recently caused me to have to lay down in a dark room and take deep calming breaths have been recent headlines in UK newspapers scolding parents for not getting their kids vaccinated and leading to measles coming back, the same newspapers that propped up Wakefield and still peddle anti-vax bullshit regularly. That's frustrating. Thanks for the hype train, everyone.
And to rodents and things like that. But on the other
Oh yeah,
hand,
the protocols are still a staple of conspiratorial belief. You see them all the time. It's disgusting. It's blatantly false. It has been proven time and time again. But conspiracy theorists don't care.
and he also saw the Jewish people as kind of a metaphysical enemy of the Aryan race. And he saw things coming to a head. Either the Aryan race was going to die off, killed by the Jewish people, or vice versa. And that's why he had to implement his final solution. And so again, conspiracy theories can have consequences, and that's why we need to understand where they come from, how they gain traction, why certain people are more likely to believe them. And so this leads me towards the psychology, some of the findings that have emerged over the last few years. And so to illustrate the first finding I want to talk about, I want to show you a video, first of all. This video is from a classic study in social psychology from the 1940s. And all I want to say about it before I show you is that in the original study, participants...
Whatever the Aryan race is. Yeah, that would be, if it was in writing, Aryan race sick. SIC, for those who look it up. Anyway, DM Trey says, I don't know if you have heard of him, but there was a theorist named Julius Streicher, who was a Nazi Alex Jones, and so responsible for the Nazi rise to power, that he was one of the few civilians that was executed under the World War II trials. Oh my goodness, I'm gonna look this person up. Hold on. Gotta take a picture of that name so I don't forget. Julius Streicher. Oh yeah, I'm gonna have to look that person up.
Just viewed...
Speaking of Ford, oh god. Nope, Can't play that. That is a NBC Universal production, my friend. And I would like this to continue to be my job. So, no. Angel with a $10 super chat says, not many YouTuber viewers right now, it seems, but I'm not on Twitch, so thank you for still streaming here. I used to just catch VODs, but now I can actually watch live. Been a fan since 2016. Thanks, Hannah. Thank you. Appreciate the support and the viewership.
The video, there was no audio accompaniment, but for our purposes, to enhance some dramatic tension, I've added some musical accompaniment. So it lasts about a minute or so. Please watch this video.
Let me double check this music isn't a problem. No, it doesn't. This is a video that's used as part of a psychological experiment. He's gonna explain it. It is reminiscent of Flatland. I don't know if that's intentional, but yeah. Flatland's great, by the way. Love Flatland. No, this is about the psychology of underdogs. We tend to sympathize with people who are on the back foot. This extends to such a level that it doesn't even have to be people or even animals, it can be shapes. Like within this film so far, again, these are abstract shapes, but you take this for granted. I assume you're feeling sympathy if you're paying attention to what's happening within the story of this. For the dot. You're scared for the dot. It's literally an abstract shape. We are giving intent and agency to abstract objects. Like, you take this for granted, but this is supposed to show you and express that you shouldn't. Are you? I don't know. Were you paying attention? The point is, I'm not telling you you need to feel actual deep emotion. I'm saying you can follow that there's a story here. The fact that you as a person can look at these abstract, flat, two-dimensional shapes and conceive of a narrative in which the triangles are fighting the circle and the circle is an underdog is indicative that you see those narratives where they don't exist because, again, they're abstract shapes. That's the point. Ugh.
My music didn't seem to work for some reason, which is a pity. It was this kind of dramatic operatic score that reaches a crescendo when the triangle is smashing up the house.
I could hear it.
Doesn't matter. So, like I said, this was a classic study from social psychology from the 1940s. The researchers, because of technological limitations at the time, they had to cut these shapes out of cardboard and animate it one frame at a time.
The triangle is a bully? Yes. Yes, they are.
And they put together this video. And they showed it to 34 participants, 34 people, with no further explanation. They just asked them to watch this video and to describe what you see, to write down what you see happening on the screen. And one of their participants described it in purely abstract geometric terms. They said the circle enters the rectangle, a big triangle appears on the scene.
I'd be so curious more about that person. Like, why did they not pick up on the narrative and described it in very literal terms, whereas everyone else picks up on the narrative? I don't know. It's an old experiment. Rachology says it's obviously a classic enemies to lovers story. The large triangle and dot are going to fuck hard later.
And so on. The other 34 participants, they didn't just describe it as shapes moving around a screen, they described it as a story. They described the shapes as characters in this story. They described the shapes as having motives and personalities and acting out some kind of story. Some of the participants said it was like kids playing in a playground chasing each other. One participant, I think, said it was like a witch tempting two little kids into her house.
See, that's interesting to me on the other end, that people ascribed that much meaning, and not just like, I understand vaguely this is the archetype of a story being played out in simple symbols. The fact that people ascribed, like, character to the level of, like, witches and children and personality to me, that's fucking interesting. That's stuff they brought to it. Yeah, we relate to stories we already know. Yeah.
And so what this demonstrates is that our brains are finely attuned to signs of intent. We're always looking for motives, trying to figure out what people are up to. And all it takes sometimes is just a few abstract shapes moving around a screen, and we see it in terms of human motives and intent. No, I'm not saying that it's wrong for us to do that. I mean, the researchers designed this video pretty carefully. They scripted the whole thing out. In fact, in their own paper, they describe it in anthropomorphic terms of like a triangle chasing a circle and stuff like that. They deliberately designed it to be like characters acting out a story. But the point is that that's all it takes, as little as it takes. Just some shapes moving around a screen in a way that vaguely resembles some kind of human action. And we begin to interpret it in terms of human motives.
I think they should redo that experiment these days, but have a computer program randomly have the dots go around and stuff. I think that'd be interesting. Get some different sets of action and see what different people attribute to it. Some can maybe be more ordered looking than others, which again is subjective, but you know what I mean. Just see what people get, because at least with this old experiment, you know it was intentional. We know that there were people behind it actually animating it. What happens when it truly is a completely random pattern?
Intent. And so we saw at the very start of the talk this projection bias. So when we want to figure out why something happened, we project our own beliefs and tendencies into other people. But when we're trying to explain something, there's a more basic question we have to answer first, which is, was this event intended, or was it just an accident? Was it chance? And so what this kind of experiment suggests is that we have this bias towards assuming things were intended, rather than just seeing meaningless action taking place on a screen. And so this very same video that I showed you a moment ago, this was used in an experiment recently, last year. Again,
Tori says, why does this guy look like he wants to tell me about his do-it-all app called Woof, and that he's looking for investors?
By Karen Douglas and colleagues.
Fired guy.
They showed people this video, and instead of asking them just to freely describe what they saw, they asked them to rate on a scale from 1 to 7, how conscious do you think the shapes are? How alive do you think they are? Questions like that. And then, in an ostensibly unrelated questionnaire, they asked them about conspiracy theories, various popular conspiracy theories. How plausible do you think these are? And then they compared the scores, and they found that there was a positive correlation. The more people saw these shapes as being alive and conscious, the more likely they were to buy into conspiracy theories, which is interesting. And so I ran another study looking at a similar idea, along with my colleague Chris French at Goldsmiths. A similar idea, but we used quite a different method to look at this same question. What we did was...
I think this is the dot experiment he did, which is similar, but with a race as opposed to a fight, I think. H-Bird says, I once heard a song whose lyrics were literally just random words. I knew it before listening, but it still felt like if you look hard enough, you'd hear meaning. It was creepy. Was it I Am the Walrus?
We showed participants a set of 12 ambiguous sentences, things like these. She kicked the dog, he set the house on fire, she popped the balloon. So these sentences are deliberately designed to be ambiguous in as much as they could be describing something that happened on purpose, or they could be describing something that was an accident, right? Maybe...
Oh no, maybe this is the one with the messy desk?
She was really...
I'm trying to remember which experiment. I assume a lot of these are ones he went over in his book.
And the dog was under her feet, so she kicked it out of the way. Or maybe she was like carrying some laundry and didn't see the dog underneath her and tripped over it, right? Could be intended, could be accidental. And so what we did was we asked people to read these sentences, describe whatever comes to mind. And then we counted up the number of sentences that people had interpreted as intended. And again, we asked people about various conspiracy theories and we compared the numbers. We found that the more of these ambiguous sentences people interpreted as intended, the more likely they were to buy into conspiracy theories. And so, again, this is interesting and it makes sense because conspiracy theories are painting a world in which basically nothing happens by accident. The conspirators are in control of everything.
Conspiracy theorists these days will explicitly say that a lot. A mantra of the BBBY community, as well as other conspiracy theories like QAnon, is there are no coincidences, which is an objectively untrue statement.
And so if you have this bias, if you're more susceptible to this intentionality bias, then you're more likely to be receptive to claims that paint events, ambiguous events from the world, as having been intended by some kind of conspiracy. And this goes back to one of the features that I mentioned in our definition of a conspiracy theory. They paint this world in which the conspirators are unusually competent, they can make and execute these elaborate plans. Again, nothing happens by accident. The conspirators are in control of everything. So the intentionality bias is one psychological quirk that might lead us towards conspiracy theories. Another finding that's emerged from the literature concerns what we call the proportionality bias.
Have a good night, Lady Anne.
And basically what it says is that when something big happens in the world, we assume there must have been a proportionally big cause. When something small happens, we kind of assume something small probably caused it, right? And so this proportionality bias might influence people to believe conspiracy theories in as much as
It's a good example comparing the JFK assassination to the John Hinckley Reagan shooting. There's tons of conspiracy theories about the JFK assassination, but not nearly as many. I'm sure they exist, but there are far fewer, and they don't take the same place in the public consciousness as the time Reagan got shot and lived. Because he lived, so it was less of a big deal.
Tend to pertain to big, significant, momentous events from the world. Things like the assassination of presidents, disappearing airplanes, terrorist attacks, things like that. And so it might be the case that something so big happens in the world, we don't want to think, or our brains tell us that it can't be the case that something small caused that. We become more receptive to explanations that involve bigger ideas, like a grand conspiracy that's been going on throughout time involving dozens or hundreds or thousands of people. And so this has been demonstrated in quite a few experiments now, using fictitious scenarios like made-up newspaper reports of the death of presidents or airplane accidents. And keeping all things equal, people are more likely to interpret these kind of events as the result of conspiracy when the outcome is bigger. So when the president dies versus if the president survives, or if the airplane crashes and kills many people versus if it manages to land safely.
Lilac Rosenberg with a link.
Okay, the Hubble telescope launched back in
Oh god.
1990. 4 years later, 1994, we get that image right there. Okay, you know, shot back down to Earth from the Hubble telescope. Now, what did NASA do? Of course, they tried to hide it, but it didn't work. Now, by the way, that picture right there, my uncle gave me
What was I supposed to have seen that was supposed to be hidden?
picture. It was taken by a photographer.
Cuba Hawk says, Chat and Hannah just need to say I love y'all and happy Friday. Happy Friday back at ya.
At Ellington Airfield of the Hubble telescope. You know, you guys know my uncle worked at NASA, and he told me that
My uncle worked at NASA, guys. I swear. My other uncle works at Nintendo, and he says Sonic the Hedgehog's gonna be in the next Smash Brothers. Now that joke doesn't work as well in the 2020s, because Sonic did end up in Smash Brothers, but let me tell you, when I was a kid, everyone's uncle worked at Nintendo and knew about the Smash Brothers characters that were gonna be in the next game.
that NASA, you know, does in fact try to hide images and anomalies from the public. Okay, I just wanted to include that little tidbit of information in my video today. But check it out. I mean, look, you can see towers, pillars, caves. I mean,
Tails and Smash. I agree. I think it's a travesty that there is only one Sonic rep. At minimum, they should have had Sonic and Eggman. At minimum. Fuck, give me Shadow. Shadow can just be one of those characters that's like a reskin with slightly different stats. You know how they do?
it looks like a man-made building, okay? This galactic city in the middle of the universe. I mean, this is mind-blowing. Like, you know, I thought it was fake.
Does Sonic and Smash Brothers have human teeth? I haven't looked in his mouth.
But this, like I said, guys, this is a real NASA image leaked to the public. And I don't know why I've never heard about it. I was watching another channel last night.
Oh,
and
it's
they
supposed to
covered
be
the
heaven. You're supposed to think it's heaven, like a literal heaven, a physical heaven, like from Christianity. Oh, God.
topic here, and I was blown away. I mean, it's quite beautiful, actually. And the crazy thing is, okay, when it was leaked back in 1994, it was one day after Christmas. So was that intentional?
Jesus. Fuzzy Simba, thanks for 11 months, says, hi, Hannah, so glad I can stop by today. Good to see ya.
You know, because they're calling it, you know, the city of God. You know, so to me, I mean, I don't know. Was that someone at NASA?
You thought it was Mount Olympus, home of the gods?
That
Same diff.
you know, one is basically trying to send us, you know, the American people, the Earth, the world, for the world, really. When we're talking about the Hubble telescope, are they trying to send us a message? I mean, what are we looking at here, guys? Crazy. I mean, it reminds me of like ancient ruins, like on Mars or the moon.
Again, good illustration of what's being talked about in terms of the construction of conspiracy theories. This isn't about positive evidence. Quite the opposite. It's about, look at this weird thing. Now let's speculate and opine based on this thing, and we're gonna just make guesses with absolutely no concrete reason other than, I feel it. That's the conspiratorial style, is look at this weird thing. I can't explain it, so let's come up with hypothetical explanations with no evidence, but in theory could explain this and still fit into their own worldview.
Moon, or you know, or any planet for that matter. But check it out, and it has like these weird domes and tower, almost like a watchtower, and you can actually see different rooms. And
Can
I mean,
you? Again, he sees so much that isn't there. He fills in the gaps.
to me, there's too many.
Just like with the circles and the triangles. He's putting so much there that is not there. Ah.
There's too many shapes and there's too much geography there. It doesn't look natural.
Geography. Random image in this noise. Or random noise in this image, rather. Is geography.
Okay? And again, it's very beautiful to look at.
It's garbled JPEG.
When I saw it, I just kind of stared at it for a while. I was like, wow, that is absolutely beautiful. But, I mean, right there's the original image right there. I did add a little bit of a filter, but like I said, at the end of the video,
Gasp.
like that'd be
Liar. It's funny when they hear that NASA sometimes touches up photos, oh, it's all fake, but you put a filter on a thing and it's fine.
All else being equal, people prefer bigger explanations for bigger events. And I think a perfect example of this from the real world concerns the assassination of JFK. As we saw, this is one of the most widely believed conspiracy theories. More than half of people usually, according to surveys, think there was a conspiracy behind the assassination of JFK.
It's a fake image to start with. Perfect.
It's interesting to compare it to the failed assassination of Ronald Reagan, right? The thing about that is that nobody thinks it was a conspiracy. There have never been conspiracy theories either at the time or since alleging that there was a conspiracy behind this failed attempted assassination on Ronald Reagan. And so I think if the outcome had been different...
Agreed, depraved ambiance. Being comfortable and learning to be comfortable with ambiguity is a good thing. Like, that's part of life. Don't search for an unfounded explanation just because you don't have a founded one.
If President Kennedy had have somehow survived, or if Reagan had have died, which he very nearly...
He's saying the thing I said. Yeah, I predicted he was going to say that because I saw the picture of the JFK shooting versus the Reagan one.
He was only saved by the doctors who were treating him. Then we might have seen something very different. We might have seen more conspiracy theories about the assassination of Reagan.
How old is this guy? This was uploaded in 2016, so older now. But, I mean, he was certainly an adult at this time. He was a PhD in psychology.
Fewer.
Again, the book he wrote, in case you're curious, one of my favorite books about conspiracy, Suspicious Minds, Why We Believe Conspiracy Theories by Rob Brotherton, who's the guy we're watching.
About the attempted assassination of Kennedy, because of this proportionality bias. And so the last psychological tendency I want to talk about is our ability to find patterns in the world. We're constantly finding dots and connecting them together. And we can easily see this in terms of like visual illusions, right? Things like this. This is called the Kanitsa triangle. It's one of my favorite visual illusions. All it is like 3 Pac-Man kind of shape, these circles with segments missing, and 3 angles. But what we see is not just those incomplete shapes. We see 2 triangles and 3 circles, right?
I think
Complete
being president ages you. Stress ages you.
shapes.
I imagine there's some stress with being president.
One
I also think it's a little funny, though, when they're like, look at Obama at the beginning of his presidency versus the end, or any president who isn't... I mean, honestly, any president, especially if it's a 2-term president, like, yeah, that's like a decade of their life. They're gonna look older. And usually they're, like, in their 40s or 50s or even 60s. Now we have, like, really fucking old people running, but, you know. Like, yep, that's a decade where you age a lot.
white triangle on top with no outline, overlapping the triangle on the bottom.
Every decade you age a lot. It's a decade. It's 10 years. 8 years in this case, but, you know. Including the elections and stuff, let's round it up to 10. It's fine.
With this black outline and 3 complete circles that are eclipsed by the angles of the triangles, right? But that's not there at all. It's just incomplete shapes. The most amazing thing, I don't know how well this works on the screen, but you can almost like see the edges.
Oh,
of
you're
the
fine,
white
Harold Edelman. You
triangle
didn't
with
say
no
anything wrong.
outline, right? It looks like a different shade of white almost. It looks whiter than white, but it's not. It's the exact same color pixels. Our brain is just interpreting it. It's filling in the dots, connecting the dots, and telling us that these are complete shapes that are overlapping. And so this tendency to find patterns, to see meaning, again, it might relate to conspiracy theories. This has been investigated in one of the first experiments was by Jennifer Whitson and Adam Galinsky in 2008. They ran a series of experiments. One of them involved literally connecting the dots. They used these visual stimuli, which are like noisy, they like visual static, these blobs, and there are images.
Two
hidden
bears
within the
high-fiving.
static. Like in this case, you can probably make out like a Saturn kind of shape, right?
Oh,
This
yeah,
is
you can
another
see
one.
that.
Can anybody see the shape in that?
Let's see. Let me see if I can see it. It's a schooner. Oh, now the bits are in the way. I'll read this while that goes away. Racheology says, the study of archaeology is perfect for developing an appreciation for ambiguity. You can read an entire book in the discipline that covers decades of work and amounts to, yep, some shit went down here at some time. What does it mean? Shrug. Give us more funding and we might have an answer for you in 50 years. Ah. I legitimately can't see anything. H-Bird says, that's why we need to elect Mark Kelly to be president. We can keep his identical twin Scott as a control, then we'll get to the bottom of the presidential aging thing.
No, there's nothing there. It's
Oh, there is nothing in this one? Nice.
just purely visual, random visual static. There's nothing in there. But what they found is that people oftentimes, when they were kind of rushed a little bit, they would report seeing images in this random static. They would see like faces or animals, buildings, things like that, even though objectively there's nothing there. Their brain would connect the dots, they would see something there. And they were especially likely to do this when the researchers manipulated their sense of control. When people were made to feel like they don't have control over their own lives, over circumstances, they became more likely to see patterns in these kind of visual stimuli. So that was one experiment they did. They also did other experiments where they used like data from the stock market or like superstitious stories, things like that. Again, people were likely to find illusory patterns. But for our purposes, the most interesting
Illusory patterns in the stock market. Who would fall for that? So to speak.
thing is they used another scenario involving a conspiracy. This story that might have been explained by conspiracy or it might have been chance. Again, a lot of people were likely to perceive a conspiracy in this ambiguous scenario. And again, they were more likely to when they were made to feel like they didn't have much control over their circumstances.
See you, Mossloth. Good to see you.
So my favorite example of finding a pattern in the real world and it leading some people to perceive a conspiracy involves something called the Umbrella Man. Has anybody heard of the Umbrella Man? A few people. It's not
JFK.
that well known.
We don't really cover the JFK assassination on this channel just because I don't find it that interesting. But the Umbrella Man is interesting in that it's a good example of random noise being given significance that it is not warranted. Basically, in the Zapruder film, the only film that we have of JFK's head doing that thing it did that one time, there was a guy with an umbrella. It was a sunny day, but he was carrying an umbrella, and people were like, this is really sus, what's going on? And he was a central part of, like, a lot of conspiracy theories, and then eventually they found him and did question him. It wasn't anything suspicious, he just had a fucking umbrella, because some people have fucking umbrellas. But people will see things and be like, that's different than the other things. This must have significance. Do I think there was a second Bang Bang? No, I do not. I have no reason to think that.
But we can find
Let me be clear, though, also, if it came out and there was, like, evidence that there was more to that story, great, cool. I just have no reason to think that currently, and just suspicion and weirdness isn't enough on its own. Like, I get it, the whole situation's weird, but no, I just think Oswald shot him, and then a guy shot Oswald. It's a weird situation, it's fucked up, but I don't think it goes that much deeper than that. Unless more evidence comes out, and if it ever does, great, I'll change my view, but I gotta try and stick to what the evidence shows, and I can't just believe something just because it's suspicious.
him in the Zapruder film, which is very famous. I assume most people have seen it. The Zapruder film starts with as
Witt said he brought the umbrella that day to heckle Kennedy as an indirect reference to Joseph P. Kennedy Sr.'s support for Neville Chamberlain. Obviously.
we saw some police motorbikes coming around the corner. Abraham Zapruder, who filmed
Thank you for letting me know, though. That is funny. And the kind of thing that you kind of need historical context to even understand. Huh. Very specific.
that he was just testing out his camera, make sure it works, before the motorcade came by, and there's an abrupt cut, and we see the JFK motorcade going down the street. Everything seems normal.
Can I show this? He's not gonna show, like, the part, right? It's historical, it's fine. And it's the Zapruder film, it's whatever.
Everybody seems pretty relaxed and happy. JFK's waving to the crowd. Spectators are happy to
This
see.
is an academic thing. He's not gonna show his head popping in, like, an academic presentation, right? I can't imagine. H. Baird says, it's like when the Beltway sniper was loose. The shooter was in a blue sedan, but a witness said they saw a white van, and so everyone was on the lookout for white vans, even though white vans are everywhere, and it was the wrong car. M.H. Darkbeast says the man with the umbrella is the head of the Umbrella Academy. I saw it on TV, and they wouldn't broadcast lies.
See him. Then we get to this point in the video, and a street sign comes between the camera and the motorcade. So JFK goes out of vision for a moment. And then when he emerges again, it's clear that something's wrong. He's kind of clutching his throat in this unnatural way, and the video goes on. Very shortly, there's the gruesome headshot. There's like a cloud of blood and brains emerges from his head. His wife, Jackie, is panic-stricken. She climbs over the back of the car.
Sorry, that's just also how, you know, the casual way you explain stuff like this when it's this much later in history. You just got a guy to be like, yep, his head exploded.
And the motorcade speeds off. And I think a lot of people have seen this video so much that it's just kind of become like a thing. We've all seen it, we all know it, but if you really watch it, it's horrifying and haunting. So I'm not going to play.
Crisscross says the historian Sean Munger on YouTube breaks down the JFK assassination very well. Oswald acted alone, there's no conspiracy. Yeah. It is funny, like, literally Oswald tried to go and work for, like, the USSR, and they were like, he doesn't have anything of value. Again, like, it's just fucked. It's just a fucked up situation. It's just fucked. That's it.
That part of it. But what we're interested in for our purposes today, we can see in this frame of the video. It's not entirely obvious, but if you look closely, right here, emerging in front of the sign, we can see like half of a black umbrella.
I feel like there's an episode of the 80s Twilight Zone where JFK shoots himself in the head due to time travel shenanigans. Hope I'm not misremembering that. Rageology says, here's an interesting take on the history of assassination. The city that killed the president, a cultural history of Dallas and the assassination. Oh, thank you. Let me add that to my list. Bum bum ba-dum bum. I'll have to do it later because I think I have to switch to the American Amazon, and it's set on the UK one currently.
Everybody see that?
Oh, it's a Red Dwarf episode. There's another episode of Twilight Zone where there's a JFK assassination episode, though. And maybe it's his ancestor that ends up having to shoot him? I don't remember. I watched it semi-recently, but I was in the shower, so, like, I wasn't paying that much attention. Twilight Zone, for some reason, is a go-to, like, shower show for me. I'll usually, like, because it's like it's a shower that's not like a bathtub too, it's just like a big stand-up shower with glass doors, so I just have my tablet outside of it and I set up a playlist. I'll just watch Twilight Zone.
And so this is odd, because...
I want someone to come up with a list of every fictional, funny way JFK has been assassinated. Like, again, like the Red Dwarf one and the Twilight Zone one and X-Men Days of Future Past.
Earlier that morning it had been raining.
That's probably already a TV tropes page, right? That feels like a thing.
It wasn't a very nice day, but it cleared up, and by the time the motorcade was going through Dealey Plaza, it was a bright sunny day. It was pretty windy, so it wasn't umbrella weather.
Quantum
and
Leap?
Nobody, either by Dealey Plaza or along the rest of the motorcade route, was holding an open
Was it me who was talking about the Quantum Leap JFK assassination episode? I've talked about it before, because I'm a big Quantum Leap fan. I like that ending. It always felt like to me that I don't want to spoil it. I'll just be vague. The show's old enough that if you want to know, you can look it up. If you don't care, you don't care. The show was always more about interpersonal relationships and that individual people's lives matter. It was never a show about big historical events. So I do like that the end of that Quantum Leap 2-parter does reveal that it was less about the big historical event, and again, even though it was a big historical event, it was more still about a personal thing. It wasn't about saving JFK. It was about something simpler and much more personal and human, because that's what Quantum Leap was about. Anyway. Freyline says, here's a picture of the protester in the UK doing the same umbrella protest. History's so funny. You're telling me this is... I believe you that this is a real thing, of course. But it's just like, this looks like a Charlie Chaplin movie.
umbrella. This was the only open umbrella, seemingly, in Dallas. And it happened to be right beside the president at the moment that he got shot. And so this seems odd. Some people noticed this. And it's not an illusion or anything. He really was there.
I heard about Tucker's continued Russian propaganda tour, but I didn't see the specifics. I know he went to a grocery store or something, which is a pretty funny, obvious throwback to the Boris Yeltsin 80s American supermarket visit. It's a pretty famous propaganda moment in the Cold War near the end when the Russian leader came and saw an American supermarket and was so impressed by the variety and stuff. At least that's the public image of the event.
This photograph. Here's another one. Just about the moment that the motorcade went by him, this guy holding up this open umbrella. And so people noticed this, and they thought, that's strange. Why is this guy right next to the motorcade at the moment of the assassination holding this open umbrella? Doesn't make any sense. And it gets even stranger because he wasn't just standing there with the umbrella. In fact, he was kind of like hoisting it up and down, twirling it around a little bit. If we go between these two pictures, you can see here it's kind of close to his head. Here he's holding it aloft in a kind of strange way. And eyewitnesses saw the guy before the motorcade went through. He was kind of milling about. He looked like an ordinary guy wearing a suit, holding an umbrella, closed, put away. Then he opened it and was twirling it around as the motorcade went by. Afterwards, he put it away, strolled off. And he wasn't questioned by the police at the time. Nobody knew who he was. For a long time, he just kind of got away. And shortly, people noticed this umbrella. They started asking questions, why would this be here? And for some people, they thought maybe he's part of a conspiracy. Maybe he was signaling to the assassins, maybe signaling that it's the right time to shoot, or that the shot was successful, it found its mark. Other people thought that maybe he had a more active role in the conspiracy. They thought maybe his umbrella was the weapon used to assassinate the president. Maybe it contained some kind of concealed projectile firing mechanism. Maybe he was the assassin. And of course, this would implicate like government agencies, probably the CIA, who would have had to design something like this, right?
As crazy as this is, by the way, I should point out that I'm pretty sure the CIA or the FBI or some intelligence agency did come out at one point and explain that they had a umbrella that was a weapon that basically you could poke someone with and it would eject them with a poison. So you could just be in a big crowd with an umbrella and basically poison someone and they wouldn't know. So the idea of it being a gun is pretty out there, but I don't know. Concealed weapons are a thing. But not that.
Um,
The KGB killed a guy with an umbrella? Yeah.
for a long time, people
Had a pellet or something in it that...
spotted this anomaly, this dot, and they connected it into a wider conspiracy. They asked, what could this guy have been doing? The only possible explanation is that he was part of a conspiracy, right? They spotted this
sort of thing isn't uncommon during that era of intelligence. It's gotta be so different now. I don't know anything about this, but I gotta imagine, like, if you were to try to do something like a James Bond movie today, and it was based on how intelligence really worked these days, Q would probably be the hero. I just mean, intelligence is probably primarily done digitally, right? Through attempts at, like, gaining access to other countries' like information and stuff. I could be wrong, I don't know. It's intelligence, I don't know shit about it. Just seems to me there'd be a lot of more boring tech stuff, and I say boring in the audience sense, like if it was a movie, as opposed to actiony, whatever.
anomaly and concocted a conspiracy theory around it. And so again, this is one of our features that I mentioned in our definition
Hbeard says, the breathless reporting this week about Russian space nukes is literally the plot of GoldenEye.
of conspiracy theories are based on
In fairness, that was around a thing. There is a space treaty that basically the United States and Russia, well, the United States and the USSR, Russia is the successor state to the USSR, and its old things should apply, because it was still allowed to stay on the UN Security Council, even though it was no longer the USSR. So those treaties should still apply. Basically signed that neither the United States nor the USSR, Russia, would do weapons, nukes in space. So if Russia really does that, that's not good. That's not good. On the bright side, the US's space capabilities are much better than they were a decade ago. So, you know, I'd rather not do another Cold War.
anomaly hunting, finding these things that don't immediately make sense, and creating conspiracy theories out of them. And, you know, in this case, it seems kind of reasonable, right? What else could it have been doing? Why is this umbrella there? We couldn't possibly know the answer. And so a conspiracy is kind of as good a guess as any, right? But, fortunately for us, we know the answer because the US government tracked this guy down. They found the umbrella man for the purposes of the 1970s Select Committee on Assassinations, where they were reinvestigating the chemistry.
Geology says, I miss the days when the Russian government had enough self-respect to assassinate people with style. Now they just throw lumps of radiation at people. No class, shakes head sadly. Or a window suddenly appears for people to be pushed out of.
The assassination. They wanted to know what this umbrella man was up to, and so they put out...
What realistically does the US does if Russia breaks those treaties? Depends on who's in charge. Lots of sanctions, most likely. No one wants to escalate, but I would imagine even harsher sanctions than are already on the table for the Ukraine stuff.
adverts in newspapers asking, does anybody know this guy? If you do, let us
At that point, maybe it would be enough that the rest of the UN kind of wants to finally tell him to fuck off. Like, at least on the Security Council, but like, I don't know. That's
know.
not a good thing either. Having them there as a place of discussion is better than them feeling cut out, because that's the entire point of the UN, is to promote peaceful discussion. But...
And they found him this way. A friend of his came across this thing in the newspaper. They called up the government and said, I think this is my friend, Louis. And so the government tracked him down. They hauled him in front of this committee on assassinations. They asked him, did you assassinate the president? And he said, no. They asked him, like, were you part of a conspiracy? Were you signaling somebody? And he said, no. It turns out what he is he was an insurance salesman who lived in Dallas at the time of the assassination. And he really was there. He was standing by the motorcade with this umbrella as the president went by, as he got shot. He claimed he wasn't involved. Even though this was like 15, 16 years after the assassination, he still had the umbrella, remarkably. So you can see Louis Stephen Witt sitting here. You can see the umbrella
Gotcha, Astrofox.
in front of him. And so, of course, the government didn't
The
take
Security Council and its veto powers are bullshit, though. I guess I always took that as more, how do I put this? I guess I always took that as a tip of the hat to the recognition that despite the lofty ideals of the UN and nations meeting on common ground, there is the practical assumption that nations with, political and military power basically are still doing what they want. Like, it's fucked up, but it's fucked up in a way that is just tipping its hand to the reality of the situation despite lofty ideals. Again, that doesn't make it right. I just think it's kind of funny that it's like everyone's kind of like, yeah, this is fucked up, but also like, that's just kind of how the world works. The world's fucked up.
take his word for it that he didn't kill the president. They wanted to see the umbrella, right? They asked, did you have a gun in there? They got a staffer of the committee to pick up the umbrella and open it. The committee chairman made a joke as she was opening the umbrella. He said maybe you should point it that way, pointing towards the press. And she opened it up and it kind of splayed itself inside out obligingly. And that got a laugh. And there was no gun in there. It was just a regular umbrella. And the chairman concluded, well, I guess there's no gun in it. Well, of course, they asked him, so what were you doing? Why were you acting this way with this umbrella? And so he explained. He explained that the black umbrella was a symbol of appeasement. During World War II, Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister's policy of appeasement towards the Nazis, had become the symbol of appeasement because Neville Chamberlain was noted for carrying around a black umbrella.
It's a very strange thing to me for him to even do. Again, I believe him. People are weird. But, like, you are upset with Kennedy Sr.'s relationship with Neville Chamberlain because of how he treated, you know, Germany in the early parts of World War II with appeasement. So you went to JFK Sr.'s son's presidential parade, motorcade, to do a umbrella thing? Goddamn, people had a lot of time before the internet. Reachology says, the UK, a small basket case nation, we still have a UN veto because fuck you, we're never giving it up.
And JFK's father, Joseph Kennedy.
That would be, you know what would be funny as fuck? This is so ridiculous, but it would be funny if the UK was removed from the UN Security Council and it was replaced by the European Union, like a representative of the European Union as a whole. Little funny.
Kennedy had been the British ambassador during the run-up to World War II, so he was associated with Neville Chamberlain. By association, the black umbrella became kind of a sore spot with the Kennedy family. And so Louis Stephen Witt, he didn't even really care about Kennedy, or as a person, he didn't care about his policies that much. He just explained that, like Louis Stephen Witt, I'm kind of a conservative kind of guy. He knew that Kennedy was kind of a liberal kind of guy. And he had a black umbrella to hand. The president was coming through town. He just figured he would go. He would take his umbrella with him, twirl it around as kind of a mild, obscure heckle to Kennedy. He wanted Kennedy to see it, be a little bit upset. That was all there was to it. And unfortunately,
Imagine in your last month. I'm sorry, this is a little dark and morbid, but it's my show. I'm imagining one of the last things Kennedy's seeing before he dies being, oh man, I hate that fucking umbrella thing. That's so mean to my dad.
Unfortunately for Louis Stephen
That's an unfortunate end.
Witt, the president just happened to
Going out while being heckled.
be assassinated at the very same moment. He explained to the committee that if there was a Guinness World Record for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, doing the wrong thing, he would have won, and there wouldn't have been any close runners-up. And so this is a perfect example, I think, of how truth can be stranger than fiction, right? We couldn't have guessed, nobody could have guessed this explanation. It's too obscure. And so the conspiracy theories kind of made sense. They were a reasonable guess until we knew the correct explanation. The American writer John Updike, he wrote about the Umbrella Man, back in 1967. So this was before the Select Committee on Assassinations, before we knew the real answer. Not long after people had first spotted this umbrella in the Zapruder film. He wrote about it in a Talk of the Town column for the New Yorker.
Phraseology says there are genuine questions about if either Scotland or that bit of Ireland we still pretend to give a crap about leaves the Union, if England and Wales could still legally have the right to the UN veto.
It's a beautiful piece of writing. It's eloquent and insightful, I think. This is a short excerpt from it. He said, "The truth about those seconds in Dallas is especially elusive. The search for it seems to demonstrate how perilously empiricism verges on magic." And I always thought that was just a beautiful sentence and insightful too. Because when it comes to our psychology and our attempt to understand the world, seeking patterns, connecting dots, it's one of our most important fundamental abilities. We rely on.
There was a really good quote from Umberto Eco in the book I was reading today earlier about conspiracies. That was another great conspiratorial quote. I gotta grab that book next time I stream so I can share it with you guys.
On it every moment of the day, whether we want to explain like the cycle of the seasons, or when crops grow best, or like what brand of cat food our cat prefers, or if we want to come up with like an insightful metaphor or analogy. This all relies on finding connections, on meaningful patterns. And science too relies on finding patterns, on looking at data, trying to find patterns in it, and trying to decide which ones are real and which ones are just randomness. And so we do this all the time, and it's one of our brain's best, most important abilities. But the price that we pay for having a brain that's biased towards finding meaning and seeing patterns is that sometimes we see patterns even when they aren't there, even when it's just randomness.
No, it's not Foucault's Pendulum. It's a book about conspiracy that had a quote from him. But I'm not reading that currently now.
Chaos, chance. And given our other biases that I talked about, projection bias, the bias to see intent rather than accident, the proportionality bias, I think it's not that surprising that sometimes our brain tells us that a conspiracy has occurred.
Sorry, Foucault.
Whether one has or not. So, like I said, I wrote this book. It's called Suspicious Minds. That's what it looks like. You can follow me on Twitter. I have a website called Conspiracy Psychology. I want to say thanks again to the project.
Oh my, not. I probably don't follow him. Should probably do that. Pull up his Twitter real quick over here.
Project for inviting me. Thanks to the ESRC for funding some of my research. Thanks to Bloomsbury for publishing my book. Thanks again for your attention. And we'll have a Q&A in a moment.
Thank you very much. Alfred?
Yeah. Thanks, Rob. That was excellent, fascinating, a fascinating talk, and I love great examples. It's and shows some of the richness of the work that's going on in psychology at the moment. That's getting to this question of why people believe in conspiracy theories. And as you're about to find out, I'm not a psychologist. I just have a few. But because so much of the psychology work has been coming out, as you say, in the last 5 years, we've been seeing a lot of it in our project. I suppose so I've got a couple of questions that really get around, I just want to understand a little bit better some of the aspects of this work. So one of the papers that was most widely reported was one by your colleague Karen Douglas and another colleague called Dead and Alive, How People Believe Contradictory Conspiracy Theories.
Hold on. Dead and Alive. How? Book conspiracy. Dead or Alive, Beliefs in Contradictory Conspiracy Theories from 2012. Cool. Sorry, just saving that for myself for later to read.
The idea was that one of the findings was that people who believe one conspiracy theory are more likely to believe another, and that this extended even to believing conspiracy theories that seem contradictory. So,
Yeah, that's the paper, I think, where they talk about Princess Diana and people who believe both that it is likely that she faked her own death and that her death was orchestrated by the royal family. Two theories that are obviously in conflict with one another.
believing that Diana had been assassinated and believing that she wasn't actually dead at all, that something else had gone on. And so, to sort of a smug intellectual type like me, this gives me a nice chuckle and, aren't people foolish? But it also makes me think, well, what are we getting at here? What do we mean when we say somebody believes a conspiracy theory? And because the baseline of a great deal of this and political science and a lot of our empirical work on it is survey research. What is going on when people say agree, mildly agree, strongly agree, and so on, to some question about a conspiracy theory? What are they?
Do they actually believe both, or do they think either is possible? In the study, when they questioned them about it, it came down to basically a vibe of they felt something was suspicious or wrong, and therefore either was a possibility. So you are correct in your interpretation. It was not that they concretely necessarily said this one and this one are objectively true. It was more so that they were very open to both being true, either or, but they weren't sure which. But they are open to completely being on board with both at the same time, despite recognizing that it can't be the same. It's more so, again, it's not about evidence, it's not about analytical thinking. It's about they have a vibe, something is off, and therefore any hypothesis or statements that feed into that belief that something is wrong becomes much more palatable and maybe even something they seek out, that they want.
Are they assenting to the truth of a proposition in some strong sense, or are they doing something else? And it puts me in mind of some work from political science on survey responses, in the related context of misinformation, where they would ask people, to answer survey questions. They were about sort of empirical questions. So they'd ask about how big is the national debt right now, and then when they asked self-identified Republicans, and this was under the Obama administration, they would sort of say that it was worse than it was. And you had this sort of partisan bias in judging the state of the economy. And then they said, okay, you might be expressing some partisan bias here. Why don't we pay you money for getting closer to the answer? And then they actually all got closer to the answer. So there's at least a danger that people are doing something different when they're answering questions than just expressing their sort of states. And it's something that I just don't know.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard that study. I don't like that. The truth is the truth, but that's an uncomfortable finding on some level. Even if it's not conscious, they know that they're inflating the numbers when there's nothing on the line for them. Huh. Oh, I don't like that even a little bit.
Maybe you could speak to about how people believe in conspiracy theories, or what they're doing when they say they believe in conspiracy theories, and what we're doing when we impute these beliefs to them. The other brief comment that I wanted to make, or question, has to do with your really nice discussion of the problem of defining conspiracy theories. And you reject this idea that we should just say that a conspiracy theory is just any theory or any account of a conspiracy, because that would deviate hugely from ordinary language usage. That's just not how we use the term. That's not our intuitive sense. We know one when we see one, and so on. And I think there's something, and there's something really important about that. But there's also perhaps a problem in sticking too close to everyday language. And a problem, basically, that we as researchers might uncritically reproduce the social category that we're studying. So the sort of the white-collar crime problem, you could call it. Because, white-collar crime was this term introduced by Edwin Sutherland in 1943 at the American Sociological Association, and he accused his fellow criminologists of not really counting the crimes of the wealthy and professional classes as crimes, and not looking for them in the same way that they looked for the crimes of the lower classes. And so the crimes of wealthy professionals, such as businessmen and doctors, politicians and lawyers and so on, were identified differently and dealt with through different means. So they often didn't result in convictions, show up in conviction statistics and that kind of stuff. The end point of this whole process, he said, was that the criminal statistics show that crime as popularly conceived and officially measured, has a high incidence in the lower class and a low incidence in the upper class. And his thought was, look, what we're doing is uncritically taking a category and then finding things that are associated with it. So my question, I suppose, is there a similar danger in the study of conspiracy theory? In that conspiracy theory, as popularly conceived and officially measured, we then find in our own survey research, actually, that it's associated with social exclusion, that it's associated with distance from power, and so on.
It's an interesting question. How do you keep yourself from defining yourself into an Ouroboros loop where you are continually confirming your own biases about what constitutes conspiratorial thinking by defining certain things as conspiratorial thinking and then seeking those things out to correlate? I get what he's saying.
This seems to be giving a pass to the paranoia of the powerful, in a way. Things that look a lot like conspiracy theories, but that aren't called conspiracy theories in everyday
Oh boy, this was 2016, huh?
language. Like the
I wonder how he feels about this now, because obviously it's been years since this, and now, of course, conspiracy theories went mainstream, and very often, powerful people extol conspiracy theories, and they are called out for such a thing. So, that's kind of interesting.
that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11, which hits most of your buttons. It involves connecting the dots. It involves making some assertions that look unfalsifiable or that seem to constantly evade.
Yeah, this was May 2016, too.
It implies implausible competence, all of these sorts of things, yet it's not called a conspiracy theory. So I suppose just a couple of questions that come from that then is that, would you then explain the paranoia of the powerful using the same repertoire of cognitive biases and so on and so on? And has anybody sort of started studying that, or is it mostly directed towards mass belief and the idea of popular delusions?
I think I know I'm just some random internet streamer, but I have 8 years of life happening since this happened, and seeing Donald Trump and other powerful, rich people like Elon Musk go full conspiracy theorist. It is exactly the same. Same exact shit.
And has this kind of psychological work crossed cultural boundaries? Because that would be another sort of... but maybe that's a different question entirely. And I'll just leave it there and say... Let's open up to the floor. You don't have to respond to my
heard
talk
that
immediately, but let's open up to the floor
opposition.
as well.
Thank you very much.
Leader died.
Well, would you like to respond directly first?
Sure, I can, yeah. Let me see if I can do it kind of briefly. So first you mentioned the what are the problems of survey research? Do we know, when we ask people, like, how much do you agree with this conspiracy theory on a scale of 1 to 7, from like completely disagree to completely agree, can we know that they are saying that they literally think this to be true, or is it more of like taking a position because it's an interesting position to take? And the answer is, we don't know. This is really, I think, one of the limitations of a lot of this research, because it's in its infancy. We haven't really gotten around to dealing with these kind of issues yet. And I think it is a problem, because I think there are probably a lot of people who answer in the affirmative to whether they believe a conspiracy just because they think that's kind of fun and interesting. Like I mentioned the figure of 4% of Americans say they believe that lizard people rule society, right? And that extrapolates to something like 10 or 12 million Americans, right? American adults. And I have a hard time believing that 12 million Americans literally think that lizard people rule society.
I do not.
I think at least some of them.
Sorry. Like, I'm sure some of those are just people who are either misunderstanding the question or, like, just trying to do the troll answer. No, I don't think it's that far off. I think most people of that 4% that said they believed in lizard people really do. I think yep. That sucks. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to believe. And what he's doing here is kind of funny, in that he is using motivated reasoning. He is saying, I have a hard time believing that's true. That's an argument from incredulity. He just doesn't want that to be true, and neither do I. But the only reason he's saying it is really just because that's a shame. Like, you know what I mean? We're all susceptible. We're all susceptible to motivated thinking.
Are
motivated
just
reasoning.
Taking it as a position to take for whatever reason. And so I think it's an important direction for the research to go, is to figure out what do people mean when they reply to this. So that's work for the future. As for the issue of whether we're perpetrating stereotypes or a certain view of conspiracy theories, I think that's another problem. And I think there have been attempts to define conspiracy theories as as claims that are put forward by people that are going against the position of authority, are going against the official stories. And I think that's a problem because sometimes, as you kind of mentioned, conspiracy theories are the official explanation.
Yeah, it's over 350 million in the country.
Kind of obvious ways.
Last time I
Nazi
checked, I think
Germany,
it was like
the conspiracy theories
360.
about the Jewish people was pretty much the official position. Or in more less obvious ways. So, for example, in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, George Bush, launched this war on terror. The way that he talked about the people who were behind these attacks showed a lot of features of conspiracism, right? Kind of painting the villains as this cohesive group of people, saying that
Apparently,
they're
it's
over
only
here, we can go fight 'em.
331.9 million.
It's a similar
Slightly
kind of
less than I thought.
logic to a lot of conspiracy theories, saying that there is this identifiable group of perpetrators who's behind this. We can
At least that's what it
understand
said.
them,
Although it was
understand what they're up to, and we
2021.
can fight against
Well,
them.
There's probably a more recent
And
figure.
so yeah, again, I think it's an important perspective, but one that
339
hasn't
million?
really begun to be addressed, at least not in the psychological literature.
Thank you. What about one of the points I've raised, which was the strange capacity of human beings to believe contradictory things?
Yeah, that's I think that's one of the most interesting studies. Like you said, it got kind of the most press. It was by Karen Douglas and another colleague of mine called Mike Wood. What they did is they found that people who think that Princess Diana killed herself, for example, are more likely to entertain the idea that she was knocked off by the British government, even though they can't both be true, right? They also looked at the death of Osama bin Laden. They conducted this research shortly after he was killed by the US government. They asked people, there were conspiracy theories that said Osama bin Laden had been dead for like a decade. He died of this obscure disease, and the government was keeping him alive as like a boogeyman. There were other people who said
Wait,
that bin Laden
333, thanks for 31 months. Says thank you for your content. Thank you for viewership. I appreciate it.
was still alive, that they hadn't really killed him. And again, the people who believed one tended to be more open to the other, even though they're contradictory. And the explanation that they put forward for this is that
People do that, Harold Elbowman. People, this is one of the things that I like about Suspicious Minds, is it doesn't just, and again, he's the author of the book, there's the cover to the book, check it out, I would highly recommend Suspicious Minds. We tend to think of conspiracies in the large sense. We tend to think about people wearing tinfoil hats, and, imagining JFK conspiracies and moon landing being faked and stuff, but in reality, day-to-day life is full of people with conspiratorial beliefs. You have them, I have them, I try and check them the best I can, but these are just features of human psychology. These are not exclusive to hardcore conspiracy theorists, Conspiracy theorists, in the way that we think of them colloquially, are an extreme, but there is a gradient, and we are all potentially victims of our own psychology. Rageology says, looking back on the last decade, I feel that the infiltration of conspiracy theories into politics has more to do with politicians abandoning the notion, based on observing what happened in the early 20th century, that it's too dangerous to indulge them and not worth the damage to systems it can cause to get those votes. Conspiratorial beliefs are not new in American politics, though. I do want to point that out. Look at, Jesus Christ, look at a lot of American political history of the 20th century, burdened by the Cold War, Red Scare, Satanic Panic. All of these things were conspiracies. Again, not to say there was no threat or conflict with the Soviet Union, but the way that it was addressed by McCarthyism and blacklisting and the overall paranoia and mass hysteria surrounding these events, that was conspiratorial thinking. The enemy is all around us. I'm sure it was a thing before the 20th century, too. It's all over the place. Fuck, Nero fiddling while Rome burns is a conspiracy theory from ancient Rome. Like, it pervades. It's not some small corner of human existence. Conspiratorial thinking is the marbling on the stake. It's all throughout the whole thing. It is not a thing that is segregated out of the rest of human experience and conspiracy exists over here in a corner. It exists through every strata of political and personal life. Because it's your brain. Your brain's everywhere you go. So. Yeah, the claim about the Christian thing, but he wasn't fiddling either. That was false.
belief in individual conspiracy theories like bin Laden was already dead or he's still alive. It's not so much about the details of the theories themselves, it's more about how they are consistent with a more generic view of the world, a view in which official explanations are rarely true, a world in which the government is usually lying to us, not telling us the
Sorry,
whole
someone asked me to turn him up. I will turn him up. 1 second. There it is. Sorry, my volume thing went away and I couldn't figure out why.
truth. And so they also asked people in the bin Laden study, they
My
asked,
audio? His audio or my audio specifically?
do you think the Obama administration is covering up some important information about the event? And once they took that question into account, the direct relationship between the contradictory conspiracy theories disappeared. It was accounted for by this higher order belief about the world in which conspiracy is just the usual explanation. Once you buy into that, any individual conspiracy theory seems more plausible, even when they contradict one another.
Okay, thank you. Right, let's sort of.
I don't know what to do about the desync if it's happening for everyone, so just gonna roll with it.
Who's got a question, comment?
So is there any way to train people out of believing conspiracy theories, or is it just innate tendencies?
Well, this is, again, the research unfortunately hasn't quite gotten there. But we do know, for example, that confirmation bias, which I didn't mention in the talk, but has also been researched, is a big problem for conspiracy theories. Once you already buy into a theory, you seek out evidence that's consistent with
Radiology says, I'll modify it to say enough politicians thought it was too dangerous.
any evidence that seems to go against it. You are much more, you scrutinize much more.
Okay, so just one person having an issue?
There's also something that's been studied called the backfire effect, which is when we present somebody with evidence that explicitly contradicts their belief, shows it to be
It makes them double down. They feel like, they're trying really hard. They're manufacturing evidence to prove me wrong. That's how deep the conspiracy goes.
false. They don't always change their mind. Sometimes it makes them more convinced of the initial belief, which again is a particular problem for conspiracy theories because they're based on the logic that if somebody is telling you, somebody in authority especially, if they're telling you this is false, well, of course it must be true, because what are they trying to cover up? Why are they trying to mislead us, right? There must
It's a genetic fallacy. They're one of them. You can't trust information from them. Ominous.
be something to it if they're even bothering to engage with it. If they're not bothering to engage with it, well, of course, it's part of the cover-up, right? So it's very difficult to try and
Radiology says, look, the relationship is this. I give you money and you agree with me and make me feel smart. Right on.
counter conspiracy theories using evidence because they seem to be a product, at least in part, of some of these psychological biases and tendencies.
I'm sorry, I have to urinate real quick, so I will be right back. We'll continue. Kurt Mulgrew, thanks for 18 months. This sub-baby's name is going to be Cherry McCherenstein III. H-Bird says, the issue with politicians embracing conspiracies is simpler than that. Conventional wisdom prior to 2016 was that openly embracing racists and bigots would lose votes from Republican moderates. They believed this because the moderates swore up and down that bigotry was a deal-breaker for them. They were lying. Republicans know that now, so this is the only way they have a chance at winning nationally. Yeah. I'm hoping that demographic change is doing enough to erode their hardcore support that this strategy won't be viable moving forward. We'll see how this election year goes. But, yeah, I definitely see what you're talking about. Yeah.
That are wired into our brains that affect our view of the world, all kinds of decisions and beliefs that we come to, not just conspiracy theories, they're shaping our view of the world constantly on an everyday basis. And so one study that does kind of address this question of how can we try and get people to be less receptive to conspiracy theories, they didn't use any evidence about the theories at all. What they did is they tried to get people to think in a more analytical, less intuitive way. And the way that they did that is they just used a hard-to-read font. They wrote the conspiracy theories in this kind of gray, like, twirly font that was really hard to read, and they found that people who read that, the exact same claim written in that font, were less likely to buy into it than people who read it in, like, Arial size 12 black, like a really easy-to-read font. And so it seems like just struggling to read something makes us slow down, makes us question our intuition, and makes us less receptive to conspiracy theories. Whether we can put that into practice in the real world, I don't know. But yeah, again, there's more research to be done.
That fits in with Daniel Kahneman's stuff about thinking fast and thinking slow.
Exactly, yeah.
David?
One of the things you mentioned where you see these biases is where people see the randomness of, say, the stock market. And that famously, people are always looking for patterns in the random dots. They see them, you can read it, websites everywhere saying they can see these movements, this little hat, this big hat, and they think that history repeats itself. They also look for intentionality. The stock market is saying this, is communicating this. But I've always been struck by the fact they don't tend to attribute conspiracy theories to it. Actually, it's one of the striking features of contemporary conspiracy theories that people seem to be, I mean, maybe this isn't right, but my sense of it, less likely to say something like the flash crash in the stock market, where it dropped 1,000 points, which would seem to be right ground for conspiracy theory. They don't tend to attribute conspiracy theories to the movements of the stock market. Is that because there are some things that are too big, even that people have an intuitive sense that that one would be too hard to manipulate? Although actually we do have evidence that people do manipulate these markets. It's just one of those puzzles of contemporary. I wonder if you had a view.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think, I would say that there are people who think that that's all a conspiracy,
Yeah, I know there are.
but it's not widespread. It's not on the level of like JFK or 9/11.
Again, this was before meme stocks were a thing. This was before GameStop. The GameStop thing happened. This was 5 years prior to that, so...
and things like that. And my suspicion would be that it's just not big enough of an event in the sense that it's not striking enough. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not the same as like a presidential
No one had just written an interesting enough narrative for people yet. But it showed up.
assassination. It doesn't get 24-hour rolling news coverage unless it's a massive recession. But people aren't thinking about it in the same way as something that's just in your face, like a disappeared airplane or a presidential assassination, things like that. And also, maybe it's just...
Kagami says, honestly, the strategy isn't really viable. The fact that the Republicans are becoming more and more openly anti-democratic, and the fact that their bigotry and hyperfixation on it seems to be bleeding their base, and their base just dying, seems to be proof that on some level the strategy of theirs is long-term loss for them, and it might not even be a short-term win. I think that's part of the reason that they've gotten very anti-democratic, is because they're aware that they can't win based on anything... Like, they couldn't win based on issues, so then they shifted to these, like, conspiratorial bullshit things and grievances, you know? Imagined grievances, and, you know, whatever woke thing of the week they're mad about. But even that isn't really, I don't think, working long-term with demographic shift, because the people that they're rallying against are people who they need to eventually court for votes. Trump has done slightly better, for instance, in... some demographics, Black and Hispanic males, for instance, have had a higher Republican, like, voting for Trump than historically, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to the overall trends. So I don't know. I'm hoping that this year turns out to be a wake-up call and that Republican strategists really recognize that, hey, we need to jettison this Trump shit and this conspiracy stuff as quickly as possible, because this is poison. But that's optimistic, I think. Conspiracy theories and delusional thinking motivates a lot of people. We'll see how motivated, not those kind of people are in November. Go out and vote. It matters. Conspiracy theorists will.
Just kind of confusing. Maybe it's too complex. Like an assassinated president, there's something tangible to that versus trends in the stock market. Maybe it's not intuitive enough for people to start thinking about conspiracy theories for it.
But if you just take it a bit further, I mean, maybe could it be that the stock market as such is an immensely complex system? But we did have a clear manipulation of a more specialized market, which is the LIBOR market, which was manipulated.
Yeah.
And where in the end, suspicions about it turned out to be right.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing, the LIBOR thing. How few conspiracy theories there were about it. Yeah, and similarly with, something even more like conspiratorial in a prototypical sense, like the NSA revelations about collecting data about people's phone records and stuff. Yeah, that's classic stuff of conspiracy, but I was kind of surprised how few people came up with conspiracy theories about it. How little talk there was. Obviously there was some, but there was an outcry from people saying, look, we were right all along, as you would expect. But I think part of that is, like I said, conspiracy theories are inherently unproven, are inherently speculative, and so once one revelation emerges, like the NSA stuff, then the conspiracy theorists move on. They say, well, of course that's true, we've been saying that all along, but what are they really not telling us? What's the next secret we're going to discover?
But even say something like Black Wednesday, Black Monday, Black Wednesday, when we were driven out of the ERM, which in some sense is the seminal political event in Britain in the 1990s, a more significant event than the death of Princess Diana. It impact on people, it completely changed their view of the Conservative Party for 15 years. There was conspiratorial activity. George Soros bet heavily against the pound. But there aren't conspiracy theories about it. I mean, it is striking the things that sort of fit some of these patterns, but which don't get. And you may be right, because the explanatory material is there and it allows people to move on. But it's always struck me that people are much more inclined to see conspiracies outside of financial events even though there may be more conspiracies in financial events.
Yeah, it's a good point. Again,
Yeah, the
there's more
Nazis had a
research to be done.
plurality in their version of the legislature. Not a
And of course,
majority,
if you
but
look
a
at the
plurality,
video-
and I think they were able to make a coalition party with some of the other closer to their political affiliation.
Norman Lamont, emerging from the Treasury, to announce that Britain was leaving the euro. On the top right-hand corner of the frame, you see a young man who's called David Cameron.
Holding an umbrella.
Okay.
Formed a coalition with the Catholic Party. Thank you.
Do you not think that this might slightly be an example of the kind of white collar crime thing? The fact that we don't really see these things that we're talking about
Hydrate.
as conspiracy theories because they're kind of widely accepted. Do you not think that this is the conspiracy theory that's the equivalent of white collar crime, that financial conspiracy is, although widely regarded within academic circles to be legit, is actually just another conspiracy theory, and whether or not it's true, there is conspiracy theorizing there, and not all of it's proven maybe, but, or even when it is proven, it's still that kind of, the same kind of ideas.
Yeah.
Sorry, it wasn't very eloquent, but...
Yeah, no, I think there's, maybe there's an element too of if it's right under your nose, like we all know there's white collar crime and price fixing and stuff like that, maybe it's just too obvious, it's not exciting enough. I think another important feature of conspiracy theories is that they're good stories. In the book I write about, the kind of classic narratives that we like to tell and to consume, stories about good versus evil and overcoming monsters and stuff like that. And they're about uncovering secrets. Again, they're unproven. They always want to prove something that hasn't yet been proven. And so maybe we know that people in the stock market are up to shady stuff, so it's not fun enough. It's not new enough, maybe.
Benikagami says, frankly, the anti-woke stuff doesn't even work with white people unless they're fully in the cult. More and more white Republicans keep wondering why all their politicians talk about is woke stuff. They even say they agree wokeness is a problem, but it's low priority if the economy isn't working. I think only the cult members will vote Republican this year. The others will either not vote because they're not activated or vote Dem to spite Trump. You know, I hope you're right. I don't know. There's a lot of time between now and November for narratives to form, for events to happen. Who knows? It's early in the year. Stay vigilant.
Thanks, that was great.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if you've thought much about the role of media and modern digital culture kind of regarding our beliefs of conspiracy theories, and if we're more likely nowadays to believe theories because perhaps we're able to more easily access information or online social groups or communities that also believe these things.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think undeniably the internet, social media, all that makes it easier and quicker to share conspiracy theories. And it's been argued that one of the consequences of this is that conspiracy theories have become a bit more nebulous. They don't always put forward a coherent narrative, alternative narrative of exactly what kind of conspiracy happened, who was involved.
Gestures in the direction. The Blues Cluesification of conspiracy theories.
How would you explain it? They often are just...
And by that I mean, basically, it's QAnon or someone like that coming up to a group of conspiracy theorists on the internet and being like, here's a bunch of random questions, you fill in the rest. Do you see a clue? A clue. Oh, yeah? It gives the impression of a back and forth, of a communication happening between the adherents and believers of the conspiracy and the originator. It's interesting.
Just asking questions. They don't have a narrative. They're just saying, I think there's more to this. Right? And the internet makes that easier to do. You can just like type up a Facebook post or whatever in a second and fire it off. But as for whether this makes more people more likely to believe conspiracy theories, that surprisingly doesn't seem to be the case, even though there's more information out there.
Yeah, no, conspiracy theories
For one thing,
predate 9/11 by a lot. Conspiracy theories have existed in every human civilization and society. It's a part of human psychology. It's not a new thing.
the internet, although it allows people to do that, it also allows people to debunk the conspiracy theories just as quickly. You know, and you can see this after every large event, like the disappearance of flight MH370 or terrorist attacks or whatever. You know, you get these conspiracy theories articles popping up immediately, but also at the same time you get these conspiracy debunking articles popping up, you know, dealing with the conspiracies, pointing out why they're not true, stuff like that. And so it doesn't seem to make more people more receptive, and in fact there is some data on this gathered by political scientists at University of Miami, Joe Usinski, I believe spoke as part of this project a while ago, and Joseph Perrin. And what they did was they gathered data from letters to the editor that were published in newspapers over the course of...
Oh, this is pretty interesting. I don't know how much I agree with the methodology here, but it does at least show... I get what it's measuring. What they did here was they looked at letters to the editor across certain newspapers over the 20th century to see the prevalence of conspiratorial nonsense, and it remained pretty consistent. In times of, like, hardship it went up a little bit, but, like, it's pretty consistent. Surprisingly, which shocks me. You feel like, because we're exposed to it all the time, that it's risen, and these days maybe it has, but before 2016 it was pretty consistent, even with 9/11.
Like more than 100 years, from the late 1800s to early 2000s. They looked for how many letters mentioned conspiracies, and they counted them up, and they found that it was remarkably stable. People have been talking about conspiracy theories about the same amount for a period of 100 years. There were a couple of spikes, like in, I think, the late 1800s, there were a lot of fears about big business and monopolies and stuff. And in the 50s, there was the Red Scare, fears about communists infiltrating the government and stuff. But apart from that, it was pretty stable. There was no real spike after the Kennedy assassination. There was no big increase when the internet took off, or social media, or when the X-Files was on TV. It just seems to be pretty impervious to that, which makes sense from a psychological perspective. If people are responding to conspiracy theories because of these individual differences in biases that we have, it makes sense it would be pretty stable over time, and that's what seems to be the case.
Hugo?
Thanks. I was just trying to think back at this question about why financial don't lead necessarily to conspiracy theories, and I suppose I wanted to push you a bit on a question that Alfred asked you, but you didn't really respond, which was the actual nature that you attribute to conspiracy theories. Because one of the reasons you might say that financial crisis, etc., don't lead. It might be the case that you can separate out different spheres, and some of them are more likely to lead to conspiracy theories. And I think one of the questions that Alfred wanted to ask you was, do you think conspiracy theories generate types of political consequences, as you seem to suggest, in terms of Hitler and the protocols?
I think they primarily know about
Or do you think it's the
McCarthyism
other way
era
around?
Red Scare.
And the example that you have, the Dead and Alive paper, where you believe in different contradictory conspiracy theories. One other way of thinking about that is that there's this rejection of politics, or there's a rejection of the kind of official line. So if it's the case that it's politics that are driving conspiracy theories and not conspiracy theories driving politics, that might explain. I wanted to hear on one hand what you thought about that, and secondly, I wonder whether that's part of the answer to this question. Well, why are there not conspiracy theories about financial crisis? Because it's not political directly in the same way as some of these other stories you understand.
There absolutely
Yeah.
are conspiracy
Yeah.
theories about financial crises, though.
They're interesting issues. I don't know that I have the answers. In terms of the causality, I think, most probably it goes both ways. Like, taking the example of Nazi Germany, there had been, for a long time, these kind of German mysticism ideas about the Aryan race and the inferiority of other kinds of people, and so it had been bubbling under the surface, or sometimes on the surface, for a long time. And then the Protocols of Zion comes along, and kind of brings things to a head in a lot of ways, or at least fuels them. I think a lot of people presumably bought into the protocols because it was consistent with what they already believed, but I think it quite possibly helped to fuel and perpetuate those ideas as well. I think it probably goes both ways, and I'm not sure how well we can tease that apart or answer the question of is one more important than the other, or try and quantify them. I'm not sure of the answer to that. Does that kind of answer your question?
Can you speak to the personality types that either believe or want to believe the conspiracy theory versus the kind that want to debunk it? It strikes me that belief in conspiracy theory is a defensive point of view. Someone's out to get me kind of thing, whether you believe it or not. And possibly the same for the people that try to debunk it because they get a bit more.
No,
outraged
there are
when
definitely
someone's
people who believe the Nazi alien stuff. The
believes in it.
thing. I know, like, there are plenty of people who are just grifters. I've talked about grifters. They're all over the place. But no, there are people that believe things. Like, you could name any out there conspiracy theory that, like, is existent, and there's someone who believes it. I get it. Even he, like the author of this book, said that he didn't believe that 4% of, like, Americans believed in reptilians because that seems absurd. 4%'s less than I think it probably is today. These people are everywhere. These people are you and me. Everyone has weird beliefs. Some are weirder than others and more outside of the normative reality that we all collectively agree we exist within. I promise you, like, you see a conspiracy theory and you're like, no one believes that. Someone does. If you see it, someone believes it. I know that's crazy. I know that's out there. It's true. It's true. We all exist on a goddamn bell curve, and there are people on the very edges of the bell curve that are very, very into conspiracy theory.
This is happening true, even if it isn't.
Yeah. So there's been quite a lot of research into the personality traits that correlate with believing in conspiracy theories. And a lot of the findings are, one of the findings is that there just aren't that many variables that seem to reliably correlate. Or putting it another way, there are quite a few variables, but all the correlations are pretty small and uninteresting, I think. The most reliable ones are with paranoia, so people who are more suspicious, a little bit more paranoid, are more likely to believe conspiracy theories, which makes perfect sense, because they're predicated on a world in which people are out to get you. But I think that's often overplayed as an explanation, because the studies that have looked at paranoia and suspicion, they're not talking about, like, a kind of mental defect. They're not talking about pathological paranoia. They're just talking about kind of everyday suspicions, like somebody's talking about you behind your back, or like a stranger gave you a strange look. The kind of everyday suspicions that we all have from time to time. That correlates with believing conspiracy theories, but again, I think it's kind of obvious and unsurprising. One of the more surprising findings, I think, is that believing conspiracy theories correlates with open-mindedness, or at least a certain kind of
Geology says it's like Doctor Who fandom. No matter how obviously dog poo a particular story is, somewhere it's some fan's favorite episode. True.
Open-mindedness, where you're open to any kind of unorthodox explanation for things. So we also find correlations between believing conspiracy theories and believing the paranormal and New Age ideas, superstitions, urban legends, things like that. And so it seems that there is a kind of mindset where if you're open-minded in that particular way, you're receptive to any unconventional explanation for things. There's a sociologist called Colin Campbell who talks about, he calls it the cultic milieu, where it's basically this, he talks about it as an intellectual underground where people...
That's generally how I would describe the topics of my show, is they fall into the topic of the cultic milieu. The cultic milieu is a phrase for basically counterculture movements that exist outside of the mainstream, with a particular tilt towards strange esoteric beliefs. Conspiracy theorists, sovereign citizens, which are a kind of conspiracy theorist, manosphere types, basically really out there niche sub-communities with non-normative beliefs, let's say.
Basically believe anything if it goes against mainstream wisdom. And I don't really think it's fair to call it an intellectual underground. I think it's much more pervasive within society than most people realize. Everybody buys into at least some of those ideas a little bit. So those are some kind of conspiracy-prone personality types. But you mentioned a really interesting issue, which is there a personality type of conspiracy debunkers? Which hasn't really been looked at least not directly. It's obviously the other side of the coin from somebody who believes a conspiracy theory, somebody who doesn't believe. And so they tend to be less paranoid and less open-minded in that way. But it seems, at least anecdotally to me, that there is a certain kind of person, not necessarily a very pleasant or intellectually honest kind of person, who just debunks all conspiracy theories purely because they're conspiracy theories. And, you know, again, I don't think that's a very valid position. I think it's just as misguided as uncritically buying into every conspiracy theory. And, but, you know, even on my website, there's a comments section, which I never get involved in. But, you know, it's a really nice illustration of both sides of the coin. There are people who just dismiss everything that me and my co-authors write because we're government shills, you know. And there are people on the other side of the coin who just lay into the conspiracy people and call them like idiots and misguided. And yeah, it's not an intellectual position that I subscribe to or that I think is very valid.
Is there any evidence for a correlation between people who take up conspiracy theories and people who follow religion? You would think that from your point about intentionality and
why the
eyes?
eyes?
Desire of people to see sort of conscious decisions in everything that shares something.
Yeah, I think there's no data that I know of, like surveys asking about religiosity and conspiracy theories. I don't think that anything on that has been published. There has been a little bit of work in terms of a more philosophical
Talking about all of us, in what way?
perspective, comparing conspiracy theories as a worldview to religion as a worldview. And it makes sense, as you mentioned, some of these biases like intentionality presumably relate to religion in the sense of, you know, believing in interventionist God or miracles and things like that, pattern seeking.
You just mean in the sense of calling conspiracy theorists idiots? Because I don't like that in the first place.
Yeah, so I think it
I've
makes
talked about the fact that while we make fun of the beliefs, I very seriously take, like, the people. You know what I mean? Like, Chris is fucked up, but I feel for the guy. He's struggling with a lot of mental health stuff. So I would like to think I'm better now than I used to be, but certainly at the beginning of this show and a lot of it, yeah.
sense that there's a link there, but I don't think that it's really been published on much yet.
The word is yet, I think. You go?
Sorry, Rolf and I
Rolf.
I've done a study of YouGov, and it would suggest that yes, religious thinking is very, very important. It's not perhaps the most important, but it's certainly one of the most more important.
You mean believing no conspiracies? I see. I understand.
Conspiracy and democracy. Do you think that conspiracy damages democracy, or does it
She asks, do you think conspiracies damage democracy?
Yeah. So that's the title of the research project, not my talk. But I do think it's a. But it's a really interesting issue. I think there are arguments on both sides. There's the argument that conspiracy theories, even if they're wrong sometimes, at least they're holding authorities to account, and so maybe in that sense they're good for transparency and things like that. I don't know where I stand on that. I'm not completely sure because at a certain point.
It's interesting hearing him say this in 2016, May of 2016. I wonder how he would answer the same question today.
Maybe an idea is not worth entertaining anymore. But that's a risky argument as well. So I don't know. I stay on the fence when it comes to that. I think the real danger though is when conspiracy theorists get into positions of power, like we saw in Nazi Germany and Hitler's ideas about the protocols of Zion and a Jewish world conspiracy and stuff like that. When most conspiracy theories, I think, they punch upwards. They're talking about the government and authorities, industries, things like that. And I think usually they're not too dangerous. But sometimes conspiracy theories punch downwards, like in Nazi Germany, and there's a certain presidential candidate at the moment who I'll mention no further because I don't want my green card to be revoked next year if that happens. But it's worrying. I think that's worrying when somebody gets into a position of power.
Well, there's an inkling of how he probably feels about it.
Vilifying.
Considering everything that happened after this.
Vulnerable people. That's when conspiracy theories become most worrying, I think, and most consequential.
So I agree that if there is no transparency, then people turn to conspiracy.
Oh yeah, I think transparency.
Some people, of course, when they have got that sort of mindset.
Absolutely, it seems to be important. And the UK and the States especially, they receive a lot of the attention when it comes to conspiracy theories because it seems like there are so many conspiracy theorists in America, especially in the UK. But when it comes to most conspiracy theories, individual theories, the conspiracy theorists are a minority. Like, the 9/11 attacks, around a third or a quarter of people usually say that they think the government knew about it in advance or the government was behind it. And that's a lot of people.
Historically, the exception is the JFK assassination, where I think most of the 20th century after the events of the JFK assassination, 50% or above of Americans thought that there was something more to the story than the official narrative.
Worrying.
But yes, most of the time it's a minority.
Portion of people, but it's a minority. Most people don't buy into conspiracy theories. That's worth pointing out again. But that's not the case everywhere, especially, there's a scholar called Daniel Pipes who's written about conspiracy theories in the Middle East. And some people have talked about conspiracy theories in Russia.
It's alright, Rachology. I still read it. I just don't read it out loud.
Places where there really isn't a lot of government transparency and conspiracy theories there, places like that are a lot more rife for good reason.
Epstein didn't kill himself, probably has a really high belief rate as well.
Government transparency.
In fact, I would argue I'm probably one of them. I don't believe it in the I know it to be true way, but yeah, it seems sus. Seems sus! But that's all I have, so it's a conspiracy theory. That's all it is.
You don't know what they're up to, and a lot of times they are up to no good. They are conspiring, and so sometimes it makes sense to be more conspiracy minded.
Okay, well let's see it there. I want to thank you for a very clear, elegant and interesting presentation, for responding to questions in an open way. You're one of the few speakers who says I don't know. Thanks to Alfred for responding, and to you for coming. We have some drinks.
He attempted it once before, though, and that's why I don't totally believe it. Because there are also things that make it so that it seems, yeah, of course he'd kill himself. He was on trial or going to be on trial for some of the most awful fucking things ever.
But in the meantime, can I ask you to help me thank both?
That's part of what brings people to conspiracy theories, is that they feel what's the word I'm thinking of? Ambivalent. They feel ambivalent about things. It leads you to follow suspicions rather than evidence, because in that case, the evidence is circumstantial. H. Baird says, I wonder how things are categorized when you don't necessarily believe a conspiracy theory, but wouldn't be surprised if it were true. I don't know. That's a language problem of what belief even means. Belief is such a broad concept in the first place. Like, what does it mean to believe something? Because belief is different than knowing. You can believe something with different levels of confidence, as opposed to claiming to have knowledge of something, to know something. I don't know, though. That's semantic. And this is not my job. Rachology says, in that case, thanks for covering the more academic stuff. I think it's desperately needed for us to keep our feet on the ground when we cover this stuff. I agree. I think I'm going to try and do it more often. So we'll be doing, normal Tinfoil Tuesdays, but Fridays might be for stuff like this, where we look at more academic stuff about conspiracy theories. Maybe they'll get kind of, if I find shorter ones, put into normal Tinfoil Tuesday. Either way, I just want to balance the, first-hand looks at conspiracy theorists with actual academics and professionals talking about it. Therefore, I'm a communicator. I know enough about this as a layperson, but I never have and never would claim to have an expertise I don't. So I think it's good to get that in here. So my voice is not the only voice you are hearing. This way you get to hear people who are qualified to talk about this. Black's Law Dictionary request. What do you want me to look up? Theory Thursday alliterates better. I do like alliteration. Let's see. Black's Law. Belief? Interesting. Look this up. Sorry, I'm getting there. Is it not in here, really? I would have thought it would have been. Doesn't appear that it's in here. Unless I'm... Hold on. No, it's here. Good. A conviction of truth of a proposition existing subjectively in the mind and induced by argument, persuasion, or proof addressed to the judgment. A conclusion arrived at from external sources after weighing probability, conviction of the mind arising not from actual perception or knowledge, but by the way of inference, or from evidence received or information derived from others. Knowledge is an assurance of a fact or proposition founded on perceptions by the senses or intuition, while belief is an assurance gained by evidence and from other persons. Suspicion is weaker than belief, since suspicion requires no real foundation for its existence, while belief is necessarily based on at least assumed facts. It's the legal definition, not colloquial. But in legal writing, that's what those specific words mean. Belief as differed from knowledge or suspicion. So that's interesting. Alright, how long have we been going? A little over 3 hours. I think that's it for today. I will save these other videos. I know I was asked specifically to do this video from Mickey, which I will save. This will be on the list. We will do this next time. We will start with this one when we do the next episode of, like, doing other people talking about conspiracy theories and stuff. So that's cool. I think that's about it. So, cool beans. Thanks everyone for hanging out. Glad to see you. Hope to see you again soon. I'll be back tomorrow for another stream. Don't know what we'll be doing. Maybe VHS Vault or Public Domania. Something along those lines. And I'll see you tomorrow. Have a great night. If it's the weekend, have a great one. And I'll see you when I see you. Be cool, everyone. Love you, Mr. Blast, if you're here. Don't know if you are. I don't think I've seen you in a while. But Adios.